All right, it's 5 o'clock. We'll call the Administration Committee meeting for August 9th, 2022 to order. Roll call, please.
Supervisor Long?
Present.
Chair Cook?
Present.
Supervisor Burney?
Here.
Supervisor Fiedler?
Here.
Vice Chair Counter?
Present.
All right, a quorum.
We have a quorum.
All right, next item, approval of the minutes from Tuesday, July 12th. They were in our packet. Are there any changes or additions to the minutes? Doesn't look like any, so we'll let the minutes stand. Our next item is public comment. I've received a number of public comment cards here, so we'll go through those first. You have 4 minutes for public comment tonight. But if you can still please keep your comments concise, that would be great. And so our first public comment is Charles Coleman. If you can just go up to the microphone and provide your comment.
Good evening. This upcoming vote will affect the retention of fantastic employees that work within all departments within the county. This affects many of my supervisors, those who I supervise, and obviously myself. I want to remind the members the spirit of prior board members when they decided to allow PTO to roll in the long-term sick bank accounts. Prior contracts stayed effective January 1st, 2009. St. Croix County will provide a vehicle for union employees who met WRS requirements to capture 100% of their long-term sick bank. Eligible employees who have a balance in their long-term sick bank will leave with a lump sum deposited into a retirement health savings plan. Prior county boards recognize the sacrifice employees made to provide the best service possible to the citizens of St. Croix County. Employees were reliable, dedicated, and available to the public while sacrificing their time away from family and loved ones. My family has bared the burden of this firsthand. I miss birthdays, weddings, and other sacred functions to serve the community. The sheriff's office never closes. We can't afford the luxury of closing our doors during major holidays. PTO cannot be afforded to everyone all the time. Since promoted to an administrative position, I join others and no longer receive compensation for work above 80 hours. Our command staff still responds to our community, whether a death investigation or something as simple as maintaining the peace at a concert or political event. This change of course will fly directly against your goals of hiring and retention in the county. It will stifle advancement within our ranks. For me personally, I work an average of 95 to 100 hours every 2 weeks. The county promised me an incentive, a vehicle, to save my PTO for when I retire. Promises for those who are nearing retirement are in jeopardy. Their choice, retire, or they lose it. Who loses the most when we have the next mass exodus of valuable employees? The community. The phrase use it or lose it made its way through our staff advisory, a committee that I'm a member of. I wish I had the luxury of using all my PTO. Unfortunately, our command staff will not function properly with all the PTO that's afforded to us. If we were given this ultimatum, who would be affected? Obviously the community, the people that you guys serve. It affects all departments within the county. This will affect over 100 employees by eliminating or reducing the payout of the hours that they've saved serving St. Croix County. Before I conclude, I remind everyone of the phrase, Promissory Estoppel. This doctrine in contract law stops a person or employer from going back on a promise, even if a legal contract does not exist. St. Croix County promised compensation for our sacrifices. Don't be the group that turns their back on us. Please keep your promise that other board members gave us. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, the next public comment card, Justin Johnson.
I won't repeat some of the stuff that Chuck says. I don't know if he took mine or... My name's Justin. I'm a captain with the Sheriff's Office. I've held positions in this county as a patrol deputy, Canine Handler, SWAT Team, Crime Suppression Unit, Drug Task Force Sergeant, Investigator, Lieutenant, and now Captain. I spent 21 years in law enforcement. Throughout my career, I've heard about the stress, things I would see that would change me. It's my career choice. I've read, been told, the statistics said cops don't live as long as other professions, and I continue to do what I love. Communities need hardworking law enforcement. I didn't take a lot of PTO. Didn't have time to take PTO. We've never had enough cops to get things done or days off without feeling the need to come back to work. Some of my coworkers were forced to work, denied PTO, and it was put in long term. I had a plan. I was going to work hard, limit my days off, sacrifice family time, build my long term so I could retire in my early 50s. Use my long term until I collect Social Security, Medicare. Why? Because cops die young. I want to have a longer retirement. Well, this all may change. St. Croix County is where I wanted to spend my career. I felt I need to do more for less and keep doing more for less. I've donated hundreds of hours and not getting paid. This was me giving back to what I felt was important to our agency. Law enforcement, like many others, can't just stop what we're doing at 4 p.m. and go home. For some that said we took advantage of our long term and we weren't using it like intended, that's incorrect. As Chuck stated with the union contract, I'm not going to go through that again, which he already covered. I didn't want to say anything about it today, but I was saddened about the comments that I heard, what's being said. I think everyone should be grandfathered and get what they worked for. To take away from people that already earned is wrong. We should not be penalized for what we've earned. I and others use our long term as retirement benefit and should not be taken away. If you choose to change a policy, this should be for new hires, not for the employees that were planning on this for retirement. Lev?
Thank you. The next public comment from Annette Massey. Annette, do you want me to just read it? Okay. As a member of Staff Advisory and Employee Focus Group, I support the proposed changes to the LTSB policy with emphasis on grandfathering payout amounts for all employees with a current balance of over 250 hours. This will ensure employees retiring in good standing will receive the entire current value of their long-term sick bank, which they have carefully managed and planned for. All right. The next one, Heidi Dumond. Dumond, sorry, Heidi.
Hi, very nervous, thank you. Just want to stand in support of grandfathering. We have many people, I come from the highway department, many of our employees spend countless winter hours on the freeway, as long as many of the sheriffs and all the other departments do extra hours throughout the year. Many of us spend time outside of our work here as volunteers in our community. The mission statement of St. Croix County asks us to be well-serving to our community, to be respectful, to look at their well-being. And I believe that doing the grandfathering and making sure that we do what we should do as well-being people is important. So I would like to stand in support of the grandfathering.
Thank you. The next one, Jeff Kennett.
Good evening, I'm Jeff Kennett. I'm one of the patrol sergeants with the Sheriff's Office. And I can't add much to what Chuck and Justin have put together and spoke so well about. But I think a couple of things that come to mind that are important to think about as you consider whatever changes you feel are needed is that the people that have long-term sick bank accounts have been your long-standing employees that have been responsible in their decision-making and their planning for their future. They've been here for the long haul. They've put in the time and effort to keep the citizens of the county protected and to take care of the issues that come up on a daily basis within this county, and are always available and have made themselves available, like Chuck said, through birthdays and holidays and other significant events in their families' lives, that they have taken away and taken care of what they needed to do for the county and the people of the county. I also think it's important to consider the amount of money that the county would have to account for and consider in their spending when you look at the amount of PTO that might have been used in place of putting that money into a savings account or a long-term sick bank. From the standpoint of the highway department, the sheriff's department, that are 24-hour service agencies, and when PTO is taken, overtime is paid to fill our shifts in almost all cases. So there's certainly a significant expense that I don't know how much of that has been considered or looked at. So again, Chuck and Justin did an excellent job, and I can only echo their comments and hope that you certainly consider the responsible employees that have spent many years of their lives and the dedication that they've put forth towards the citizens of this county, and that you do support the grandfathering of the long-term sick bank to those of us that have for years planned on that and use that as a tool looking towards our retirement. Thank you.
Thank you. The next one is Kevin Kirby.
Can Sherry come with, we're husband and wife, we're the same.
Sure, that's fine.
Save some time for everybody. My name is Kevin Kirby. I work for the 911 Center, Sheriff's Office.
And my name is Sherry Kirby. I work for the Emergency Communications. I have 20 years of service.
I have 24 years. We both work together, same shift at night. Like everybody said earlier, the countless weekends we've lost, holidays, time away from each other. Our big problem in the comm center is we've struggled with being fully staffed for years. And that's, I look at any benefit change you make as one less reason to have people come join our department. It was a real kick in the face when I heard they were talking about taking away our long-term credits for retirement, and I hope that doesn't happen. But again, I still look at any change to benefits does affect new hires coming into our industry and our business, which we struggle with right now. We can't take time off because we don't have staffing. COVID played a role in not taking time off. Just a never-ending battle. The board's been very good to us as far as equipment in our comm center, but we need people to operate the comm center. And any change in benefits reduces us getting qualified people to come join us. Thank you for your time.
We would request or be in favor of or requesting the grandfathering of that PTO for long-term sick bank.
All right, thank you. Adam, do we have anyone in the other? Okay. And I guess if there's others here who have not filled out a card who actually wanted to speak.
Good evening. My name is Ailey Peterson. I'm the CEO for Western Wisconsin Health. I'm joined by Dr. Faisal Anwar, who's the Chief of Staff. I'll say a few words and then turn it over to him. We're here tonight to speak on behalf of agenda item number 5. We've been working closely with St. Croix County Department of Health and Human Services on a grant proposal speaking to the need and importance of a medically monitored withdrawal monitoring place of service. So in our hospital, this is a need that we see every day with patients who come through our doors who are suffering from substance use disorder. This is an ailment that afflicts our patients, our community, and unfortunately our staff. We are well equipped to handle medical emergencies and provide medical care. Where we struggle is to provide the necessary wraparound services that are required from those who are suffering from substance use disorder. I think something that's commonly not understood is that substance use disorder is treated in many of the same ways that chronic diseases are treated. So diabetes, high blood pressure, and many others. Our system is well equipped to manage those types of chronic diseases as we are in the hospital. Again, we are not well managed to handle substance use disorder. These are patients who come through our ED. We've seen a particular rise in patients in the last 2 years. During that time, we have incurred as a hospital over $450,000 in expenses that aren't reimbursed by insurance for helping to care for patients. Also, we struggle with placement of patients for long-term treatment and wraparound care. And this is where this grant proposal that you will hear from Bob later this evening comes into play. This would be an excellent referral source for patients who are suffering from substance use disorder. It would serve as a place where the hospital could refer patients, and likewise, we could accept patients for additional medical support. So we fully support this grant. We're strong, committed partners to making this work, and we urge you to accept this proposal this evening as well. And I'll turn it over to my colleague, Dr. Anwar.
Thank you. My CEO usually is a hard act to follow, so usually I go before her. I don't come to you today as a physician at Western Wisconsin Health. I come to you as a citizen of this community. I've been in this community now for about 6 years, and what I've seen in those 6 years, all the changes that I've seen from when I started to today, I just can't sum up in words. But I can tell you, alcohol use and substance use don't discriminate. I see the same patients in our ER, in other ERs, come to our hospital, and they just can't seem to break the cycle that they're in. And I know if you would use your Kitty Rhodes Memorial Dementia Center and repurpose it to a medically monitored withdrawal management center, I know a lot of my patients, who are also a lot of my friends, a lot of my colleagues, my family, including my neighbors, can really use this resource and finally break that cycle where I can offer them a resource to continue their recovery once we stabilize them at the hospital or in the emergency room. Thank you very much for your time and consideration.
Thank you. All right, Sheriff, you have a comment?
Good afternoon, and thanks for hearing many of this, the staff out. You've heard all the passion they are. This is important. It's important to me as well. With transparency, I'm also in that group. Looking at losing long-term that I felt was a promise when I was hired. The sole reason I wanted to be here? No, there was plenty of reasons that I wanted to work for the county, but that was another good resource, a good opportunity, a good benefit. And now to get, for me, 27 years in, to find out that that benefit that was promised is on the verge of not being there or being altered has struck some of us pretty hard. So I hope the consideration is there to recognize the years of service and the dedication. And as some have talked about, the last 2 years in our office, people weren't getting PTO, able to take PTO, I should say. We were working. We were short-staffed. I got to believe the nursing home, highway. There's a lot of good people in this county. And to not, I know you recognize it, but these decisions are impactful. And words are one thing, but it's really the intent. If the intent is to take from the office that these guys have banked up, anybody coming in to work for the county, I'd hate to have them be suspect of what the benefit package that they're signing on the dotted line to get a job here. I'd hate for them to be suspect of what it truly means. I don't want to use the term bait and switch, but I will. I got here on what I was promised, and to change that and take that feels like it's the sleight of hand. So please consider, obviously, the grandfathering, but also recognizing that you have a lot of good, dedicated people. And we would sure hate to lose some at the end of the year because they feel that that would be their only option to save what they felt was rightfully theirs. So thank you very much.
Okay, thank you. Is there any other public comment? Any other public comment? Other public comment? All right, we'll close public comment. If no one has any objections, I think I'm going to move item 3 up, since there's a lot of folks here that are interested in item 3, so we might as well take that one before the other two. And I believe, Ken, you will start that out for us.
Yeah, I'll start on that item. All right. Let me jump ahead to the packet. So this was an item that was requested that we take a closer look at the policy on our PTO and LTSB policy. So one of the things that I noted in that policy review is that our current LTSB policy is more generous than a lot of our comparables. There was a survey document in the packet that showed the other counties. A lot of them had phased this out back around 2012, 2014, post-Act 10. A lot of them made the changes then. St. Croix County hadn't. We'd left it in place since it probably entered the union contract around 2009 when that policy was first created. So when we look at our peers, there's definitely a difference in how they are currently treating LTSB than how we're currently treating it. The issue really for us, and probably the reason that it was asked to be looked at, was it becomes a continuing budget issue for us. So we've been increasing the budget. We've increased the budget by 67% over the past 5 years, from $150,000 to $250,000. But the expenses have continued to outpace that. The expenses have grown by 239% over that time. It's just on an upward trajectory that we've had a hard time catching up to. With limited budgetary resources, it would mean not adding positions, not providing pay raises in order to keep up with that. And we prioritize other things over this. And the way we've patched that, because you have to pay for it somehow, is we've transferred $1.5 million of fund balance into this LTSB account in order to continue to pay those. So that amount is drawing down again. We'll probably run out, if not by the end of this year, next year for sure. So it's going to take additional cash transfers in, it's going to take reprioritization of budget issues, or it's going to take a change to the policy. I mean, those are the 3 options you have. So through a lot of work and a lot of working with the staff, we looked at the policy and the different issues, and I think I came up with the most reasonable policy change that we could to get us back heading into compliance with the budget amount that we have available to us, which is the $250,000 a year. So how the policy would change would be, instead of 100% payout, uncapped at your final rate of pay, that cost was costing us a lot of money. So what we would do is we would have a de-escalating payout rate. So the first 250 hours that you had in the bank, we would still pay out at 100%. Those small dollar amounts aren't affecting the budget. The next 500 hours then, so between 250 and 750, we'd pay it out at 50% of your final pay rate. And then any hours over 750, we'd pay out at 25% of your final pay rate. I would still leave it uncapped. We had talked a long time about whether we should cap it or not cap it. Ultimately, I selected uncapped as my recommendation because I didn't want to get to the point where people were losing hours. Because I recognize that at times people are like, nope, you cannot take PTO. I know you're going to lose those hours tomorrow because of this cap. You're just going to have to lose the hours. So I didn't want anyone to lose the hours. You know, if they're over 750, at least they'd be still getting 25% of the value of those hours through a payout at the end. So that's how come I left it as uncapped. That does create a little bit more open-ended risk, but with the decreasing value of it, it allowed for it to still be manageable, I think, anyways. And then to address, in your packet, you have a sheet with the 70 employees listed. I took out all the personally identifiable information. The employees in the audience can probably figure out which line item is them because they have a pay rate and an hour balance. But these are the 70 employees that are over 250 hours. So I came up with a methodology where we would lock the value for what they would be outside the current policy. So if somebody's at 500 hours, they get 250 at 100%, and then the next 250 at 50%. So they're losing 50%, so that's sort of that lost value. So that lost value would become frozen at today's current pay rate and at the hours that they have in as of right now. The next hour they put in is going to be subject to the new policy, but what they have as a value right now would not be lost. So all of the employees are whole if they retire between now and the end of the year. So we roll long-term sick bank once per year. So usually around the beginning of December, we'll roll additional hours in if you're over your PTO cap of 320. And then January 1, they'll receive a pay increase. So technically their balances would go up. But this portion, this lost value, would be the grandfathered dollar amount on those accounts. So that was the methodology that I came up with to make it whole. So you've heard from a lot of the employees. Ultimately, they would probably prefer that we don't change the policy. But that leaves you one of the other two options then, continuing to transfer fund balance into it to cover it, or increasing the budget significantly, but it would have a significant impact on our budget. We'd probably have to increase it by at least $400,000 a year, which would be probably about 1.25% pay increase for the employees that I'd have to cut in order to do that. So it's about budget priorities, and this is the policy proposal that I have in front of you.
All right. Questions, discussion, thoughts? Supervisor Long.
I guess I'll start out. I certainly totally agree with grandfathering. I think we can't take away what we've already said we were going to promise, and I think that has to be part of the policy change. I think what you propose seems logical as long as we know that it's going forward and we're not really taking anything away from anyone. I'm curious as to freezing the dollar amount. Do you have any kind of an idea of what the impact might be if we took into consideration future pay raises?
Oh, so not freezing the dollar, but freezing, yeah. You know, I mean, there's a lot of unknown variables there of how many of the pay increases they would receive between now and their retirement. So yeah, there's an increased cost there. Yeah. If you locked the policy, you know, as some have suggested, you know, all new employees don't get LTSB, only current employees do under the 100% payout. I can tell you you're going to be putting millions of dollars more into that fund in order to cover it.
Other comments? Good. Supervisor Fiedler.
I wonder if the administrator could just describe to us where these dollars go and what they can be used for.
Yeah, so long-term sick leave bank is only payable upon retirement from the county. So retirement from the county is defined as your retirement eligible under WRS rules. So if you leave prior to your retirement age, you are not paid out. Those hours are lost at that point, which does happen to a lot of employees. The dollars then are converted into a retirement health account. That can only be used for medical expenses. It cannot be used for anything else. They become 100% vested in the employee. They leave our books and go to an account that's only controlled by them at that point in time.
So it goes to a third party that
correct.
Has the money, and then the employee draws down on that account.
Yes.
And what happens just a typical example, if an employee retired at age 60, let's say, they're a couple years short of Medicare, they'll have expenses. I don't know exactly what the average family expenses are, but let's just say we were to say $10,000 for a family of 4. They would be able to draw on this account for that payment of that insurance policy that they would then have, or other medical expenses in addition to that policy.
Correct.
Up until it was, they'd expended all of it.
Yes.
And is it likely that most of the folks that would be retiring would reach the maximum of the amount they've put into their retirement accounts? Medical accounts?
Whether they would use all of it?
Yes.
Well, there's a large variety of balances we've paid out. I mean, we've paid out balances as low as a few $100s, and we've paid out to single employees in excess of $200,000. We've had probably a handful that have been in excess of $100,000. It depends on when you're retiring. So law enforcement can retire at 50. So they have a much longer period where they could draw that. But the other general employees are at 55. So they have about 10 to 12 years before they hit Medicare. So it depends, individual circumstances, whether they're single, married, dependents. But probably the $200,000 account we'll probably never use at all.
And if there's a balance in that account when the employee dies, does that balance then revert to the estate of the employee?
Correct, yep.
Supervisor Burning.
We've been talking a lot about going to HSA eventually over time. What if we could put, like, because this in HSAs are so much more flexible down the road, what if we looked at incorporating some sort of benefit where we could put money into an HSA for the employees instead of, like, as a pragmatic solution, start that transition towards that? I just look at, like, HSAs that I've had in the past, and of course, with 4 kids in sports, those no longer exist and they're month to month, but that can be used as a retirement vehicle for down the road. Way more flexible than any type of medical savings plan or sick bank. So it's something that we should look at incorporating in. If we're going to start phasing things out, we need to find more cost-effective ways to help our current employees that are counting on this.
Yep, I agree. That's actually, part of the ultimate plan is that we do convert to an HSA, and that becomes the health savings retirement vehicle for employees. It's just that that's a long transition. I mean, you're probably 5 to 10 years before you realize a flip in the values and how the monies can be used.
So my other question is this built into the contract that we have with law enforcement?
Yes.
So that means we can't touch that aspect of law enforcement?
Correct.
Okay, so law enforcement is not affected by this. It's outside of that union contract that would be affected by this?
Correct.
And then when time comes to renegotiate that contract, that would probably be something that we would look at then, I would imagine.
It'd be a matter subject to bargaining, correct?
Correct, yeah, and that's something I don't ever want to be a part of. But anyway, I'm joking about that. But okay, so that's talks. Is our communication center included in that agreement, or is it only?
No, it's only
patrol.
Just sworn law enforcement.
Okay. What does that look like if we were to implement this? Let's say we kept it the way it was for existing employees, and any new hires are not allowed to take advantage of this. How does that look from a standpoint of, like, you're not offering the same benefits? Do you know what I mean? From, like, a legal perspective, I know in, like, some group policies, you can't offer benefits to some and then not to others.
It would be completely legal for us to grandfather in, current employees and then have a new policy for all new employees starting, let's say, January 1st forward. There's no legal issue there to provide new hires with a different benefit package than old hires have.
Okay, and then this question is back to Ken. How are we so far in finding our the way to make up our structural deficit this year? I mean, I feel like we've made zero headway on that particular issue.
Well, you haven't, but I have.
Well, yeah, okay, so that's why I'm
I got it
espousing
under
my
control.
feelings, that's all.
I got it under control.
Okay. So if we, I mean, like from a, I hate looking at this and going, okay, these people were promised.
I have a budget plan for 2023, but it doesn't include increasing the $250,000 budget for LTSB.
Right, right. So looking at this is going to help us solve immediate impact to our budget problems that we have for next year. Okay. And this resolution, from what I understand, does not impact what is already there for our employees that have earned that paid time off going into that bank.
Yep, no employee is harmed by this change in policy this year. It's any future hours they put in from this day forward that would have potentially a reduced value if it's over one of those limits, if it's over 250 or over 750. But every hour they currently have is protected at its current value.
Okay. I think that's all the questions I have for now, but my pen could go wild on a piece of paper, so I'll save some more time for later.
Ken, I have a question. If we were to just keep the current policy for all current employees and then change it for new employees, do we have any idea on long cost impact for the coming years? Or are we still looking at a situation then where we're having to make those prioritization decisions about raises for employees and things like that?
Yeah, well, it depends on how you want to solve it. I mean, if you want to increase the budget to meet the level of expenses, then it's sacrificing somewhere else in the budget. If you want to continue to use cash reserves to fill the gaps like we have over the last 5 years, that 1.5 million that we've transferred in, then that's an option, but that takes away from other places in the budget that we could have been using those monies. So it's all your decision on how you're going to use the limited resources that we have. But the grandfathering current policies for current employees, I can tell you that is a very long transition out of this policy. And you're talking 20 years and probably at least 5 to 10 before you see any decline on it at all. Actually, probably even longer than that, I would guess. But
Other comments, discussion? Supervisor Fiedler.
I know you put it in the packet, and it's, I've read it, but all the surrounding counties seem to have reacted to this issue about a decade ago and basically cut it off. Would you want to amplify on what our surrounding counties have done?
yeah, there's a few counties that still have an LTSB policy. I haven't found anyone that's uncapped with unlimited payout like our current policy is. We have the most generous policy of any of the survey respondents that I had communicated with. So yes, most of them had eliminated it. A few of them still have some form of it. And a lot of the ones that did eliminate it did do it through a grandfather. New employees were not eligible.
And I kind of want to share what Supervisor Long said earlier about, promises made and promises kept, but you were indicating that hours accumulated through this year are kept at whatever they are, no matter what the cap is. And then you indicated that the problem really is that this goes on for years and years, potentially, a decade or more, or much more. And so there are a lot of realities we have to face on how we address this. But I just was trying to think of something that would be fair to our employees, but also take into consideration all the other cuts that you'll have to make, including possibly pay cuts and that sort of thing, and possibly to give people time to plan and make their decisions, and age closer to a 100% total lifetime payout What if something down the course of years, let's say 5 years from now, you implemented the cutoff at the formulas that you've suggested? Would that be helpful? It would certainly give everybody another 5 years. They can make career decisions, but there's an end to it at some point, and other cuts don't have to be made. Is that a fair kind of balancing?
Well, the cuts would have to be made, because you're going to end up with, yeah. Yeah, it helps 5 years from now.
Yeah, I was going to say, it helps 5 years from now, but at least it doesn't go on forever.
1.5 million over the last 5 years is what we had to transfer in. You'd see something similar over the next 5, I anticipate.
I think what Supervisor Fiedler is offering is like a pragmatic, even a more pragmatic approach on this, instead of suddenly hitting them like now. I'd say 3 to 5 years would be fair, because I would, if I was sitting in their chair, I'd be not happy, would be the right way to say it. But if it gave me time to either make decisions or better use my PTO or do something different potentially with it, I think that's fair. If we're able to transfer cash in, if we do have that, let's do it. And I think a 3-year phase out is appropriate. 2, 3, up to 5. But the sudden, I understand I know exactly what they're facing, because during COVID in the private sector, we took massive hits.
So there's 70 employees that are on this list. 27 of them are currently retirement eligible. 43 of them are not currently retirement eligible. So just because you stretch it for 3 to 5 years, those people in their 40s aren't going to hit retirement eligibility. So you're still affecting them.
But here's what it also gives us the opportunity to do. It gives us the opportunity as a county board to find that HSA mechanism, because that is a way for those in their 40s. Kids are growing up, out of the house. Hopefully you're still not playing softball like an idiot like me and getting hurt and going to the ER. And you are wisely saving those HSA dollars for your retirement, because those are things that we can add into over that time frame, just so that they're not taking it as hard as they would right now. So that would be my compromise, would be 3 years, and then let's find mechanisms that will help them out long term.
Supervisor Long.
We have to remember there's still going to be trade-offs here. So even if we wait for 3 years, maybe there's that much less of a raise that we can give all the employees. That there's those definite trade-offs. So would you want to put this in effect and have the possibility of a much nicer raise where you get extra money every month or every paycheck? Or keep this for another 3 years, and then that will impact our ability to do some of the other things that we need to do that might benefit all the employees. So I have to remember there's trade-offs here. And I think if we're going to have to make some sort of a change at some point, so I think maybe now there isn't really a good time to do it. So I would say we probably need to bite the bullet and do it, but I think the grandfathering is absolutely critical. So I guess I'll say I'm fairly comfortable with moving ahead as this is proposed, as long as it includes the grandfathering.
Yeah, and when you talk about the trade-offs for employees, I mean, we have roughly 700 employees. I'm planning pay increases for those employees for 2023. There's 176 employees that have an LTSB balance right now, and 70 of them that are over 250 hours. So you end up with a smaller and smaller amount of employees affected by this policy than the benefit to all the employees of the sacrifices that would have to be made to cover this. That's one of the ways that I looked at it.
Did I hear, it sounds like kind of like you were making a motion, Supervisor.
I will, to advance the conversation, I will move to approve the policy or the resolution as it's stated, that includes the grandfathering. That's part of that resolution, correct? Okay.
And do we have a second on that?
I'll second.
Supervisor Fiedler. Additional discussion. Supervisor Counter.
Just wondering, excuse me, during the process of reviewing this, just wondering if you could share with us any of the feedback from some of the departments and personnel that, as you've seen it, and just like a brief synopsis of what their input was.
Overall, and I think I had it in my notes, the employees would prefer that the policy not be changed. It's a great benefit, and part of the reason to modify the policy and not eliminate the policy is that it is a good benefit for the employees to have this LTSB bank of hours that they can use. So I wanted to change it in a way that would help preserve it long-term. So barring that there was going to be a change, we went through a lot of iterations of what it could look like, and the policy that finally ended up in front of you, I think, received the reluctant support of a lot of the employees that did review it. So I don't know if that's a fair way of saying it, but.
Just to clarify, we're not including a cap, correct?
Correct, there's no cap.
Okay.
And before you vote, there's two other policies in that resolution. We could just
I
cover
was
those
just going to
real
say,
quick.
we should probably cover those two other policies.
They're less controversial, so.
Any other comments on this piece of the resolution? Otherwise, I think we can go to the other two policies.
Okay, so the other two, one is workers' compensation policy. We currently continue to pay employees 100% of the regular pay rate for the first 6 months after their injury for any lost time. The proposal is to change that payment to come from WMIC, our insurance company, to use them as a payout source versus funding it ourselves. And their payout would be at 2/3 of the employee's rate versus the 100% that we currently pay. However, their payment would be tax-free. So overall, it would be a pretty close percentage of not having a large impact on payments to the employee. The other policy change would be the separation from employment policy. We added just definitions to long-term sick bank, added just the verbiage that an employee cannot try and extend their employment with the use of PTO. Their last day worked is their last day of employment for separation purposes. And that's kind of needed for benefit purposes as well of when those benefits end. Current language for the layoff section, hopefully we don't have many layoffs in the future that we'd have to deal with this, but we did have one small layoff recently, which made us look at this policy. Current language states the effective date of the separation will equal the end date of the planned layoff period, which is not to exceed 1 year. That makes it a little bit difficult when it comes to payroll processing, benefit processing, things like that. Preferred language would be that the effective date of separation would be their last active day of work. However, the employee would be considered in a layoff period for 1 year and be eligible for reinstatement during that time. So basically do a rehire process versus keeping the employee in an active status for a full year. And then regarding the PTO and sick leave benefits as well, I think that if we were to lay an employee off monetarily, I think it would benefit them to go through the termination process because that then triggers the PTO payout as well. So offering that PTO payout immediately upon separation versus waiting that full layoff period of 1 year and then paying it out at that time. So just kind of some technical changes to those policies.
All right, thank you. Supervisor Burney.
I told you my pen would start going. So what do we do for the employees? And I've been in this situation, and I think a lot of us have been in this situation where we have to work because where we're staffed at doesn't have the proper staffing. So we're working our job 5-6 days a week, and we're 2-3, however many people down. What are we going to do for those folks? Because I do think that, especially in like the communications center, and I know that's been an issue for a very long time. I'm just thinking of areas like that where when we're short-staffed and our employees have to be there, otherwise we don't get whatever service it is that we provide to the taxpayers. What's something that we can do? Is there something that we can start thinking of for them to make up for that if they can't take their vacation, if they can't take their time off? I mean, I would implore us as HR and admin to think about what we can do for them.
So right now, the way the policy is written for the LTSB is that those PTO hours would still roll over, so that part of the policy wouldn't change. So currently, right, if people aren't able to take their PTO running into that situation, those hours roll over into your long-term sick bank at the end of the year, so that we don't have any type of use it or lose it policy in place.
But what happens when that accumulates over a long period of time? I mean, eventually someone's not going to be able to take 6 months off because then it just exacerbates the problem of being short-staffed.
Well, the solution is that we get to full staffing, and, we worked with Terry to get there. We added positions, which helped with that. So, I mean, those are the things that we can do in order to help alleviate that. So hopefully you guys have seen it better, at least over the last year, than the 2-3 years before that, so.
Okay.
Supervisor Long.
I just had could you add a little more depth or clarification to the workers' comp? Like, what would the impact be? And it sounds good and it makes sense. I just want to make sure that we have an example and so we're not really adversely affecting the employees.
Yeah. So every individual employee's tax situation may be a little bit different. Let me just say that. But so the current policy, we just continue their regular rate of pay at 100%, which we pay FICA taxes on and the employees pay FICA taxes on. So it costs us extra money to do it. The Wisconsin state policy and all the other members of WMIC follow the state policy guidelines, which say that after 3 days and then after 8 days, and they go back to the 3 days, they'll pay at your 52-week average. So they look at the last 52 weeks, what's your average rate of compensation over that period of time. So that's where they calculate your rate. So it's not actually your current hourly rate, it's that 52-week average rate. And then they pay it at 66% of your lost hours. So on a 40-hour week, they're going to pay you 66% of that. But it's federal and state tax exempt. So you don't pay any income taxes on it, you don't pay any FICA taxes on it. So that's why, dollar-wise, their net check comes out really close to what their check would have been with us paying 100%, but we saved the FICA taxes. So I calculated we'd save, I think it was $15,000 a year we would save with this policy change without negatively impacting what the employees are getting as a net.
Any other discussion?
Yes, one last thing.
Supervisor Burney.
Is there appetite on this committee to entertain this going to 2024 instead of 2023?
Can you clarify what you mean by that?
Well, Supervisor Fiedler and I talked about 3 or 5 years or something like that to help phase that in for our employees that are impacted by this. So I'm looking at one more 2024 instead of 2023. That's what I'm looking for. If there's, I guess, take that as a motion.
Well, would that be an amendment?
Yes. I'm sorry, I'm usually the parliamentary procedure guy here. Okay. I'll make a motion that we make this into effect in 2024 instead of 2023.
Okay. Just and for clarity here, right now we have the long-term sick bank with the other.
Let me clarify. For the long-term sick bank portion of this resolution. And I don't even know what line that would change, but I looked at you got, okay, thank you, Ken.
And Supervisor Burning, with that proposed amendment, that would. I will second the motion. Okay. See that now you're holding me for the parliamentary. With your proposed motion, that would also include, I'm assuming, all the other key components, including the grandfathering. That's already been discussed as part of that. Okay.
And yes, the 2023 would grandfather in. It would stay as it is until 2024, and then this would kick in.
So my question is, would I use the grandfathered amounts I have right now, or would I recalculate those at the end of 2023?
You would recalculate them after 2023.
All right. Yep. So the only thing you're really changing is any new hours that are going to roll over into it this December. So that's the only addition. So if somebody has an extra 40 hours that they're going to roll in, they'll get those 40 hours at 100%, rather than them being subject to whatever limitation they might be based upon their balance. So.
Okay, Bob Fiedler, or Supervisor Fiedler tells me that's correct, so I guess that's correct.
Okay. Any discussion on the amendment? Supervisor Long.
Yeah, I don't know that it really has a big impact. Maybe I'm wrong, but I'd like to hear from staff as to what the impact would really be, and are the employees really going to benefit a lot from that, or would we be better off allowing or considering better pay raises for 2023?
Yeah, Leah might be able to share some data on how many people rolled over that were over the 320 hours of PTO and what those amounts looked like, maybe on average.
Yeah, so last year, so in the 2021 rollover, we transferred over 7,000 hours into long-term sick bank that were over the 320 cap of PTO. So you're looking at an additional 7,000 hours that you'd be paying out in additional wages if we waited till 2024 to put this into effect.
Yeah, but there's 176 employees with an LTSB balance. There's only 70 that are over the 250. So, I mean, 100 of those employees, so over half, wouldn't be impacted either way if they're under the 250. So.
I guess the reason that I seconded the motion was because I think it gives our employees an opportunity to kind of prepare for that. I mean, even if it's not a huge impact potentially for them, this is a significant change for some to the policy, so this would give them more time to just adjust it. It seems like something to do. It seems like it would respect our employees in a way to give them more time. But I do have one question for Ken. If we were to move forward with that, do we have a source of funds where we could cover the potential deficit in the sick leave bank as well?
It would be fund balance.
Fund balance, okay. Okay, any other discussion? Supervisor Cowner.
Well, with all this in mind, what about, have you looked at on the cost side of this? And I know that we're looking at a significant savings to try to make it happen. Have we looked at any types of trade-offs with this, with whether it be an hourly rate increase, or as we're going forward with this, we're talking about the changing of the health insurance to have a different program there. It sounds like, just from the comments that I was listening to tonight, was a lot of the guys are putting in a tremendous amount of time, and extra time, and they're trying to make things work for us. And that's why I'm just bringing up the fact, do we really want to look at this too, is do we reward them up front for they're trying to put this effort into it? Should we look at, if we're going to be taking away on the back end, should we be looking at this for what their pay scales are at and make adjustments that way, however significant it may be?
Well, and that's what I am doing with the 2023 budget. I'm prioritizing wages in the 2023 budget as per county board policy guidance. And so, I mean, we can roll that back. I can pay less of an increase, but that less of an increase affects 700 employees for the betterment of, 10 employees are going to retire every year. So it's a trade-off. And so it's just a matter of you deciding where the priority is.
All right, any other discussion? Supervisor Long?
Yeah, I'll just add, I think the pay raises are pretty critical. And the board's already said that that's really a priority for 2023, so for all of our employees. So I think that's really, really important. And by delaying this just a year, we're impacting a lot more employees in the county. So I think we just need to move ahead with this and focus on our ability to provide pay raises for next year.
Any other discussion? Are we ready to vote on the amendment? All right, all those in favor? Aye. Opposed? So we have 2 opposed, Supervisor. Okay, so motion carried. All right, 3-2. And then now we will vote on the amended resolution, which includes the other pieces too. All right, all those in favor? Aye. Aye. Opposed? Motion carried. All right, thank you. Let's circle back to our original number 1, which is the financial report for July 2022. And Ken, this is you.
Considering the long meeting that we're in store for here, the financial report's in your packet. There are not any red flags in the financial report, but I'd be happy to answer any questions that you may have.
Any questions by anybody? Nope. All right. We will move on. All right, our next item is resolution approving Hudson Area Joint Library Agreement. I think this is
I make a motion to table this to next month's admin committee meeting, please.
All right.
I'll second that.
We have a motion to table and a second. Discussion. No, we can't discuss on tabling, right? Or can we?
You making a motion to postpone?
Thank you.
Then you can discuss.
I forgot my cheat sheet.
Yes, you can debate.
On postpone.
Correct.
Thank you.
Okay. Supervisor Fiedler.
I just had a question. I'll direct it to the administrator, but maybe anybody could answer it. This has been a topic where lots of the facts have changed over the last few weeks since we started debating it in June. And so I was just going to turn to the administrator and ask, could he just give us a quick rundown now on the status of the different municipalities, what they've done recently, what they're scheduled to do, as I understand it, even tonight, how that impacts us, and if we do it in September, is that still timely for ourselves and for the municipalities that are involved with this? Where do we sit factually on all this? And did we get a response from the Department of Revenue to the second inquiry we made to them?
That's a lot of questions. I'll start with the Department of Revenue one first, because that's the easiest one. They communicated verbally with the city of Hudson, from my understanding. I've not seen anything in writing from them or from the city on it, other than a letter from the city attorney saying everything's fine, we should just go ahead and approve it and disregard our own legal opinion. From the municipalities, the Village of North Hudson and the Town of Hudson have both requested withdrawal from the joint library. They have a 1-year notice requirement, so it wouldn't be effective this year, it would be effective at the end of next year. The Town of St. Joseph is voting on that issue tonight, so I have no idea how they're going to come out on that. The Library Board, as my understanding though, would have to approve an early termination if they were going to terminate yet this year. And I think that action has not been taken yet. I think part of the reason to table this and wait a month. As far as timeliness though, September admin, October county board, you guys are too late. It really is getting too late. I don't know what the other municipalities are going to do. They all have to approve the agreement for it to be effective. All 5 municipalities involved in it have to approve it. And you're going to run out of time just like we did last year.
Yep, Supervisor
Quick
Long.
comment. I don't know if this is appropriate or not, but I would certainly recommend or suggest to these 4 municipalities that maybe they actually get together and talk about these issues and try to figure out what their way forward is going to be, because this keeps coming up, and as you know, Supervisor Fiedler just recognized, we never know, nobody really knows what's going on. I think a lot of these municipalities don't know what's going on, unfortunately. So I think someone, somewhere along the line, needs to get these people together, and so that they can decide as a joint library how they want to move forward.
Supervisor Cowner.
Well, after taking a while to read through the legal briefs of the one company that was hired to take on, I can't remember what the name of the law firm was, but they were, it seemed in my understanding of it, it seemed like they were very apprehensive towards this as a whole, and that there would have a lot of potential challenges that could be brought up. I'd really like to see some way to help support these guys and to keep this thing going. But when we look at the statutory portions of it that the state has by Antoli's law, is it? In reviewing all of the information that was in there, they seem time and time again to come back that it's there's a lot of holes and there's not a lot of support between the statutes where we have total support towards this being able to work through. It seemed as then, and you know, if we have our counsel here, you can correct me if I'm wrong at this, but from my understanding, it seemed that it really puts us in a potential peril with having a lawsuit in the future over this. Not necessarily brought on specifically by people that are already telling us, but because of all of these, the items that were brought up in this legal brief, there's a lot of case history that leads me to believe that we would be in a bad position if we got thrown into it. And then the problem becomes, you know, the cost of defending ourselves against all of this and how it all works out. How is it all going to shake out when it's all done, and what's the additional costs going to be borne onto the county? I know that they're talking about indemnifying, but I can't see how the smaller municipalities are going to have the wherewithal to try to do that because they'd already said in previous meetings that their insurance won't cover it. So I guess that was just a comment.
Supervisor Burning.
So anyone can sue anyone over anything at any time, and that is, you can't dispute that. So no matter what course of action we go on, the county can get sued at any time for anything. If I go to my attorney and I ask him, I want to make sure that I can't do this or I want to do this, my attorney generally, when I pay him, generally him, I haven't had her yet, but when I have paid him, they find the course of action that I want them to take. In this case, it sounds as if, and we don't know what St. Joe's going to do, but we got a pretty good idea, I think. We're working our way back towards a municipal library. What we're looking at through the county is nothing more than a bridge to get us to where we need to be. At the end of the day, the Department of Revenue is the one that looks at the rules of what we can and can't do. No offense to Andy Phillips, met the guy, great dude, but he is not the authority on it per se. He's coming at it from the angle that we wanted him to, which is, hey, do you think this could go the wrong way? Yeah, it could, right? So I think the long and the short is this is going to be used to help us be a bridge for our transition to municipal library. If there's any way we can make this work, awesome. That's all I have to say.
Supervisor Fiedler.
Really getting into murky waters here with what I'm going to say next, because I know we're dealing with a hypothetical. But just to try to understand this at the financial level just a little bit more, let's assume what Supervisor Burning said is true, that St. Joe's also pulls out, and we no longer really have a joint library. Then those municipalities would be subject to the county library levy, correct? Now, in real round numbers, this year the joint library had a budget of about $800,000. The city of Hudson paid in just a little under half of that. But if the other three withdraw, then the tax levy authority of the city of Hudson would go up dramatically.
Could.
Well, so that's the question. I'm not saying they'll do it, but I'm saying I believe they'd have the authority to have a substantial additional tax levy. And then it becomes a financial and political question whether they levied on themselves more or less what they could levy on themselves given their increased levy authority. And I think they would also then get from the county approximately $400,000 in, I'm struggling for the term, the reimbursement, the rural tax. So they'd get an additional $400,000. So if they went up to their tax levy amount, if they did that, plus they got the $400,000, it strikes me that the Hudson Library then would have a budget of about $1,200,000, which would be very substantially larger than they have now. And they would have been taxed, citizens of the city of Hudson would have been taxed in part for that, but they will have a very viable library, and given the equalized value of the city of Hudson, which is enormous, it would strike me that citizens of that city are not paying as much or more than citizens of New Richmond and River Falls and other places. Am I somewhat accurate in any of those statements?
I would say so.
All right, any other discussion? Seeing none, we will vote on the motion to postpone until the September admin meeting. All those in favor? Aye. Opposed? Motion carried. Okay, our next item, presentation of 2021 audit report. I think, Leah, are you introducing this?
So we have Jonathan Sherwood here from Clifton Larson Allen, so he will be presenting the audit summary today.
Fantastic. Well, thank you for having me here tonight. Again, my name is Jonathan Sherwood. I'm a manager with Clifton Larson Allen. My responsibilities is basically overseeing field work and then the actual preparation and drafting of the financial statements, and then presenting to you fine folks this evening. And I'm going to be focusing all my comments on the audit summary. I hope that's okay. I didn't bring along the nice thick 100-page full financial statements for you. If at any time anybody has any questions throughout my presentation, please stop me. Otherwise, I will rely on Ken and Leah for a lot of more of the detailed information if I don't have it just tucked in the back of my mind right now. To start things off for you here on page 1 of my comments, I just want to first thank the county staff, Leah and her department, Denise and your department for sure, and then all the rest of the department heads that we get into and deal with a lot of the grant tie-out from the federal and state sources. A lot of additional work and additional information requests that we throw their direction that's kind of outside of their day-to-day operations, so we very much thank them for their efforts. Overall, on the general county audit here, the first item up there is your audit opinion. So we issue what's known as an unmodified or a clean opinion across the amounts and disclosures of the financial statements. So from an independent auditor's perspective, that's the highest level of assurance that we can issue over financial statements. So we're very pleased that we can meet that level of assurance again this year. It's kind of what we strive to hit. During our audit procedures, we also issue what's known as our internal controls report, and that's just taking a look at the internal controls of the county to see what's there. Are they operating efficiently and effective? We haven't found any necessarily issues with the operations themselves, but there are 2 issues that rise to a level, what we refer to as material weaknesses, which due to accounting standards, I am required to bring up to the Board of Governance, such as yourselves tonight. Those 2 items are material audit adjustments and limited segregation of duty. So both of those items are actually the same comments as prior years. So the first being material audit adjustments just basically means that through the course of our audit work, we found some adjustments that were necessary in order to be in compliance with auditing standards and accounting standards to draft the financial statements. Next is the limited segregation of duties, kind of that was alluded to in previous conversations in various departments throughout the county. There's either been staffing issues or you're just very small 1 or 2 person operations. So if vacations or things would happen, all of those financial and financial resources handling duties fall on 1 or limited to 2 people at any one given time. So because that it's not completely segregated throughout the entire county, throughout all the departments, then we're required to report the segregations of duties findings. So again, it's not a symptom of, oh, these are huge items, huge red flags, you need to immediately address them. Your internal controls that are there to compensate for these types of issues are operating effectively. There isn't any concerns that I would say that you need to take any dramatic or drastic actions at this point. Last comment for you on that section is we actually did remove a finding from previous years, which dealt with the tracking and reconciliation of fixed asset records that was present in the 2020 results. That's no longer reported here for us in 2021. So that activity was all cleaned up. Very diligent efforts by Leah and that department of tracking down and making sure all of the additions and disposals were properly listed for 2021. We also then, as part of our audit, we're required to perform what's known as a federal single audit, which just has to deal with the amount of federal funding that comes through the county. We have to take a look at all of the federal programs themselves, what rises to what's known as major programs, do a lot of sampling and selections of that. So that testing is actually still in process. That report back to the federal agencies is not due until September 30th. But so far, as of today, there are no items that would need to be reported at this point. I'm hoping that we don't have to add anything, but we don't know until we get into some of more of our detailed testing. One of the biggest issues of why that is that I intentionally made that call to delay some of that testing, which in the past we've tried to get done for the same issuance of the full audit, is the lovely ARPA programs. Some of the compliance testing, when the federal government made those payments over to all the local municipalities, some of the compliance of what was approved, what wasn't allowed, some of those final rules weren't actually issued until later in the game. Which then it's very common that we took that stance with a lot of our single audits this year to purposely delay our testing until we actually knew what the final rules were going to be. So that is still in process, and we will be meeting that reporting deadline here of September 30th. Also at the same time, we also then kind of actually subcontract or sub-allocate out the nursing home audit itself. So CLA and myself and my team also go into the nursing home healthcare campus and perform that audit on basically a separate engagement. And again, so we just issued the same type of audit statements, but just over the nursing home operations itself. So there too, we have an unmodified or clean opinion over the nursing home operations. We still report the same material weaknesses because there is enough carryover between administrative and different finance roles over there. So we still have the material audit adjustments and then the limited segregations of duties there. And I'll be discussing those operations, obviously, just in part of the county financial statements in total. Lastly on this page, just the other items that we do take care of throughout the year as part of our audit work is other contracted services. So you've got the unaudited financial report form, or Form A, what that's known as. That's due in May 15th. The audited Form A, which is the Tax 16 report, which is a hard deadline by the Department of Revenue. It's the big one that we need to hit every year for July 31st, which just passed. And then the federal data collection form, which I noted earlier, is that federal single audit requirements. And then we also then, as a firm, prepare the Medicare and Medicaid cost reports for the healthcare campus as well. So in a nutshell, that's all the services that we did. But now to kind of jump into some of the financial highlights here for us. These are the operations of the general fund, the general county operations that are not tracked or required to be tracked elsewhere, all rolls together in what's known as your general fund. So in here we've got a 4-year trend analysis. These are all balances on your balance sheet, which is a snapshot in time of 12/31/2021 results. So from an audit standpoint, I look for things that kind of jump off the page. What looks funny from one year to the next or really jumps off the page. Only a few items before I jump down to the bottom here for you. About midway down, or in that first block of information there, under the long-term receivables, you can see in 2019 or 2020 and 2021, excuse me, there's a new item there for us that just shows up there for you. And just to give you a little background, those are those loans that are tracked by the Regional Business Fund. So that's just the initial payout in 2020 of the $290,000 in loans that was made. And that's the current status of those loans that are completely current and being tracked again by the RBF, and that's the current repayment amount that's left to be collected there. The other number that really does kind of jump off the page for you is that next chunk down there called the current payables or your liability section. So you can see that that number drastically increased from 2020 into 2021, just over $8 million that's reported on that line item, almost $9 million I should say. The main contributing amount that goes into that report, about $5.7 million, is actually those ARPA funds, which I mentioned earlier. It's the first tranche payment that actually hit the county, that's what it's known as. So that's the amount of money that was received by the county and had not yet been spent or allocated over or recognized as revenue. So that's money that's in the general fund. It's included in cash and investments up top. So it is literally cash sitting in a bank in investments, but it had not yet been spent or had not been earned because we hadn't come up with plans that actually took place during the year. So that's why that specific line item really increased from 2020. Then if we kind of take a look at the general operations or the general health and activity of the general fund, we've got a couple of shaded lines there towards the bottom of the page when you're looking at your fund balance or your equity or reserves from one year to the next. Your fund balance actually breaks down into 5 total categories that's available to be used, and you're using what's known as 4 different categories or 4 different buckets. The first being non-spendable items. So that something either needs to happen in order for those resources to be available to you or have already been spent. So for instance, the case of that long-term receivable, that $255,000 mentioned earlier, you can't go ahead and spend that money again or whatever, that receivable, you can't spend that revenue until it's collected. So that's listed as a non-spendable item, for instance. The other ones are the delinquent tax deeds. That's kind of making up the biggest bulk of that number, of that balance. The next item down are restricted items. So those are restrictions placed on those funds by an outside agency, such as a granting agency or the state, federal guidelines, something like that. The next bucket that's being used at the county here is assigned. So those are fund balance assignments that have been taken, the assignments or the activity has been earmarked or set aside by an internal decision within the admin staff or a previous county board resolution that has been now updated and maintained by the administrative staff. So that $1.8 million is in the general fund itself is already earmarked for a specific purpose. And there's 4 current recurring items that go back a number of years: the recycling grant, parks, land and conservation, and then finally some pesticides activity that all make up that $1.8 million. That is completely broken down in additional footnote disclosure in the full audit report if you want to see the detail of each of those funds. So that leaves, what's left. So that is the unassigned or your true unreserved fund balance that totals just about $19.7 million for 2021. So when an outside agency such as myself will look at financial statements, we take a look at your unassigned fund balance, compare it to what your total general fund expenditures are, basically what it costs to run the government for a year. So we compare that number down to that $41.8 million in 2021, and we compute a ratio. So this allows us to basically compare one municipality, regardless of size, from one to the next. We calculate the ratio of percentage of unassigned fund balance, and it comes out to be 47.2%. So what does that really mean? Well, to start, the board does have a policy that was enacted a number of years ago. It basically states that you want your unassigned fund balance to be between 25 and 35% is what the fund balance policy states. Or said another way, 3 to 4 months of general fund expenditures. You could run the government essentially, right? Run the county for 3 to 4 months without actually taking in another dollar. It would all be coming out of your fund balance. The general rule of thumb is to have around 33%. That's a minimum. It's not necessarily a target. So obviously you're not only exceeding your county board policy, but then your general rule of thumb. So then what I've also then have the luxury of doing with CLA in Northwest Wisconsin and actually the whole state, I can take a look at, we do a number of county audits throughout the state, and kind of take a look at an average of what we're seeing right now, here and now, kind of where are all of your peer counties at, so to speak, with their ratio. The vast majority of the counties that I've noticed this year are actually in excess of 50%, and believe it or not, some of them are in the 80-95% range. The primary reason is the way that of their ARPA funds, the way that they accounted for them. Different paths you could choose, right? Some of them are smaller communities, so it gets a little bit lost in 2021 without knowing kind of the history of how they did that. As mentioned earlier, you've got $5.7 million in cash that has now been unplanned for. You're in discussions of it, how it's going to be spent in 2022 and going forward. Other municipalities or other counties actually received a lesser dollar amount, which then allowed them to not have to come up with these big plans and reporting back to the federal agency. They could basically claim 100% of their money as lost revenue, and it fell to fund balance in 1 year, and now they're essentially doing the same thing that you're doing with your unrecognized $5.7 million, but in their ratio, it's making them look extremely healthy for 1 or 2 years here as they spend down this fund balance over the course of the next few years. So if you start talking to other communities and they're saying, oh yeah, we're doing fantastic with their fund balance, it's definitely a longer conversation to figure out exactly where they're at. So yours is definitely much more comparable from 1 year to the next, which then basically says, okay, you're 47.2% in excess of your county board policy. If you're familiar with your county board policy, as I'm sure Ken is very well familiar with it during budget time, is when you're in excess of that 35%, in the next budget year there needs to be a plan of basically how to spend some of that down on capital type items, additional, basically what I usually say to people is, one-time shot in the arm type expenses, because you don't want to have to live off of your fund balance for an ongoing 10, 15-year period of time, because obviously your fund balance needs to be there for short-term emergency use. You're going to start drawing that down. And you can evaporate a fund balance if you've already budgeted it, to be living off of it from 1 year to the next. So that's kind of what I wanted to basically say.
So the unassigned fund balance is in excess of our policy is $3.8 million. So you don't have to ask me later.
There you go. The other number to kind of keep an eye on there for you too, There is a lot to be said about that current year change, which is just above the total expenses. The total fund balance current year change increased by about $200,000. The unassigned fund balance increased $216,000. If you figure that you've got about a $43 million budget, and you basically came in $200,000 over your budget to the good, you're adding to fund balance, you're doing a pretty phenomenal job sticking within your overall budget. So.
And, you know, if you look at that and you go, well, we only went up $200,000. Well, we transferred $3 million out last year, and then we replenished all of that plus $200,000.
So overall, on a $43 million budget to quote-unquote only add $200,000 is, you know, if you're trying to be budget neutral, you know, spend what you said you were going to spend at the beginning of the year. Overall, I think it's a phenomenal budgeting job that you've done over the last number of years, you can see. So, any questions on the general fund before I jump into some of the other activity? Moving on to item number 2. These are specific items or specific purposes that are set aside with an independent or specialized revenue source that is restricted to be used solely for those purposes. So you've got a few different items to be reported here. The first one is actually drawn out separately as your Health and Human Services Fund. This is reported in your financial statements, which is known as a major fund. Obviously, large dollar amounts and large items flow through this fund. So at the end of the year, you're sitting on reserves in your Health and Human Services Fund of about $3.7 million. It's a current year change of up over $1 million. You can see current levy support obviously increased from 2020 over to 2021. That's obviously the property taxes that went into that fund. As an auditor, when I look at anything that's a special revenue fund, it's basically what services are being performed, how are they being funded, and is there an additional expense that we're anticipating or a trend that we're looking at within that activity from one year to the next. So this fund obviously does kind of increase, decrease at random times. I know the experience that I've experienced with the rest of the counties I serve in Northwest Wisconsin is this is a hard activity to really get your thumb on the pulse over, because things like federal and especially state funding is kind of all over the board on a lot of these activities. So in all honesty, I look at this fund in one-year increments. Did we go up or did we go down? Typically, a lot of my counties are supplementing the results of their health and human services programs with additional levy at the end of the year. They come within budget and they say, you know, how much do we need to add or transfer into those services? So overall, in 2021, you can see that you added to fund balance of just over $1 million, and I know there's significant COVID funding, not necessarily part of the ARPA funds, but additional funds that were made available to obviously support some of these health and human services initiatives. So, looking at the other special revenue funds that are out there on the books, you've got a number of them listed here specifically. The jail assessment fund all the way through the dog licensing fund. Again, those revenues are restricted to be used for those specific services. Again, on these, I basically looked from one year to the next. Did we increase? Did we decrease? Did the program expenses, did those, you know, meet or exceed the amount that we brought in revenue? And the only thing to basically really point out to you in total, again, looking at the trend, is anything that is a negative fund balance and continues to increase in a negative fashion, right, continues to decrease, said another way, the Stop Drugs Fund. You know, they're not huge changes, obviously, when you start talking $34 or $43 million in the general fund. It's only decreasing slightly here or there. It's about breaking even. But when I see a trend that it's gone negative in 2019 and now you've added to that negative fund balance for the last 2 years, again, not huge dollar amounts, but if that trend continues and goes unchecked, you can pretty quickly notice a huge deficit fund balance, which in essence would ultimately need to be covered by the general fund. So obviously, if it's breaking even or losing a little bit here or there, not a huge deal, but just something to pay attention to during budget time, or you know, figure out what else is going in there. Maybe some potential levy needs to be levied in there, or additional revenue sources need to be sought in order to support that activity. Not a huge dollar amount that you're dealing with. So. Next item to talk about is your capital projects fund. In this case, you only have one fund remaining in 2021. So it's a separate fund to track. That's all. It is supported by levy as well as different transfers in from the general fund. And these are all your big-ticket capital projects and capital items there. So during 2021, the reserves, or the leftover amount available to be spent down in 2022 and forward, is just over $8 million. So I know that those are ongoing projects. There's things that have obviously been discussed and approved. I think a later agenda item is actually looking at the 2023 to 2025, if I read that correctly earlier, that capital replacement plan, and basically where are we at now and where do we need to be in the future. So that's where all of that activity is going to be recorded and reported back on. The next fund that you have in your financial statements is the debt service fund. It's a required fund to be spelled out separately that tracks all of the debt service, the long-term debt that's incurred by the governmental activities. So in 2021, the reserves is actually a deficit fund balance of just over $300,000, $366,000, which basically means that during the year, the revenue that came into it, the amount of tax levy that went into that fund actually was less than the amount of the debt service requirements that were needed that year. Just paid just over $6 million in principal and interest requirements during 2021. So all of the debt service requirements have been met. Obviously, you're required to pay your debt service. But at the end of the year, it's more or less just however much money was transferred into that fund was less than the amount that was required to be paid out. Not a huge concern, obviously, because going forward in the different budgeting cycles, your fixed or your long-term debt payments are scheduled out, so you just need to match up the amount that's scheduled to be made during the year matches the amount of revenue coming in. Switching gears a little bit, item number 5 are what's known as enterprise funds or business type activity. So up until this point, I didn't mention anything about long-term debt or capital assets being presented in the financial statements themselves. This is where those activities start hitting, and you actually have that activity presented to you within the balance sheet accounts. So that's why you're going to see things like the capital assets, and then the other item, which is going to look a little different than the previous pages, is the WRS pension asset. Information is included up here. So again, just when you see that information, know that since the county is obviously a participant in the WRS system itself, the system is overfunded at the state level, which is fantastic. The assets on the books actually exceed the liabilities currently, which is fantastic. I don't think any other state retirement system in the country is like that. So that's why we were able to actually present assets on the books. Know that you can't spend them for anything else. This is your share of what's on an account down in Madison because you're a participant in that system. So overall, healthcare campus, a couple of highlights for you. Number 1, operating cash increased. You can see that you now have about $800,000 in the bank for healthcare campus purposes. The primary reason why that money is sitting there is COVID relief. There's the provider relief supplemental payments, as well as provider relief payments are 2 different federal sources that the healthcare campus received. And I mentioned earlier how some of the other counties could take their ARPA funding and claim it in different ways and basically recognize it in revenue. The nursing home was available and was allowed to this specific revenue treatment. Myself, I actually recommend treating it as what happened in 2021. So the revenue that came in, you can just basically claim it. It makes the reporting back to federal agencies a lot cleaner and a lot easier, which, let's be honest, is probably the way to go. So that is the reason why now in 2021 you're going to see about $800,000 in cash sitting in the bank, which will be used to cover future deficit spending in the healthcare campus. Because as you can see a little bit further down the way, you've got current year change in net position or in your equity. It increased about $500,000. So in that $500,000, $1.84 million in COVID funding was received and recognized in revenue during 2021. So you had COVID funding of 1.8 and you only made $500,000 in nursing home revenue during the year. That also does include about $600,000 in depreciation expense, which is hitting and factoring into that number. So, that would increase that balance of about, it would bring it over to just about $1.1 million that was made during the year, including, again, one-time, essentially, we think of them as one-time payments for COVID funding of about $1.8 million. Moving on to the highway department. Similar type analysis that I like to see there is, number one, did the activity cash flow itself? Is it able to pay its bills and hopefully have a little bit left over at the end of the year? So you can see that cash investments did increase from 2020 into 2021. The results from operations, all the way at the very bottom, the change in net position. Net position increased $854,000, and that also includes depreciation expense of $1.86 million. So if you back out a non-cash item like depreciation expense, the highway department itself has been performing fairly strongly for the last number of years. 2018 is a little wonky there a little bit, just because that's the year of the new highway facility, basically came on the books in 2018, I believe. So overall, the highway department is functioning extremely strong, and it is very healthy as far as current operations. Moving on to item number 6. There's a number of what's known as internal services funds. So these are different, basically more or less benefit packages where the county itself is insuring itself in all the various departments. So these funds are set aside to charge premiums back to the other county departments in order to pay for the claims that then are expensed out of these funds. So again, in a trend analysis, it's our premiums meeting expenses coming out of these funds. And these are the leftovers, the reserves from one year to the next. So you would hope that for the most part that your year-end reserves should be fairly flat, or if they are decreasing dramatically, they better be a budgeted decrease that you know about, obviously, before you start really needing to take drastic action moving forward. So really the only thing that really has been a spend down since 2018, has been the health insurance fund, the various benefits being offered, and then the premiums being charged back to the county itself and subsequently the employees has been purposely spent down since 2019-2020 timeframe. And obviously during budget season for 2022, I'm sure Ken's got a good finger on the pulse of where this fund will ultimately end up in 2022. Outside of that, there isn't any other items here for you to really jump off the page for you. So then moving on to the last item I have for you, financial-wise, is the long-term debt obligations. So this is all of the debt for all of the departments countywide, including highway, including the healthcare campus, and the governmental activities. General obligation bonds total $48.5 million. General obligation notes is about $6.3. So that those GO notes, that $6.3, will become due between 2024 and 2026. Respectively. And then the GO bonds, you've got some that fall off in 2035, some that fall off in 2038, and some that fall off in 2039. So that's more of a little bit more even maturity schedule of your bonds. So the reason I say it that way, obviously, is because in part of the revenue limits, you can obviously increase your levy to the extent needed in order to meet your debt service obligations. So it's usually a good practice to try to smooth out how much in addition to your levy that you're needing to increase your levy by outside of the revenue cap. You basically want to keep that as flat as possible so you don't have massive swings in property tax from one year to the next. All that being said, the state of Wisconsin does limit the amount that you can borrow and have on your books for GO debt. So the total again that you're using is that $54.8 million of that limit. The state of Wisconsin says you can use 5% of the total equalized value of the county. So that ultimately calculates down to you're using, of your statutory limit, you're using 8.8% of your legal debt limit, which, let's be honest, for a county, if you would ever try to get to 100%, I think there would be torches in the street, because that would never, ever happen. A highly leveraged county is anywhere between 25 and 30%, and that's if there's, a massive infrastructure project that needed to be funded through long-term debt. I think you were fairly high back in 2019, 2018, when you were about 12%. So you can imagine what type of conversations that you would have if you had to go out and have significant debt. So long story short, you do have borrowing capacity should the need arise going forward.
Yeah, we borrowed $80 million this year. But.
There you go. So that number will definitely increase then for 2022. But either way, even adding $80 million to that bottom line, it's not going to get to the doom and gloom percentage I mentioned earlier.
Yeah.
So.
Opeb liability?
The Opeb liability is there at, let me make sure I'm reading the correct line, $1.1 million, and that has obviously drastically reduced due to the change in the Opeb policies that were enacted 20? Was that 20?
Yeah.
Okay.
That was the change to the health insurance where we excluded retirees from being on. So that's the future liability cost that we have for the cost of their health insurance claims. So you can see that policy change the savings there.
Any other questions on financial information? I do have just a couple quick policies of the fun and exciting accounting auditing standards that are going to be updated and impact next year's presentation.
Supervisor Fiedler.
Just a couple quick questions, and I'll apologize. Tell me again, what was your name?
My name is Jonathan Sherwood.
Sherwood?
Sherwood.
Sherwood, Mr. Sherwood, thank you. I apologize for not knowing you. One, you made some very nice comments about our staff and implicitly about our county administrator for the assistance they provided you in doing the budget, the way they kept the books, and the way they budgeted. And I just think that's very good to hear. And congratulations to the staff on that, and particularly our administrator, financial director, but also members of this committee who have served in the past and made these tough budget decisions in the past. I'm new, so I don't get any credit for that, but good for them. They've apparently been very thoughtful and helpful.
It's a challenge every year to deal with the auditors, so I can appreciate their efforts.
I did have one question. I just couldn't keep track of all the numbers you were giving us, but back in Section 5, you commented on the healthcare campus and the current operating budget, and you mentioned numbers relative to the income that had come in and COVID funds that had come in. Would you mind just very quickly, you don't have to get into too much detail, just reviewing what those numbers were and where do we sit, what's your judgment overall on how we sit with the healthcare campus in terms of how it's revenue flowing?
Sure, absolutely. So backing up to item number 5 again, that's on page 4 for those following along. The change in fund balance that we see there, in the books, you're going to see net income is the other layman's terms, forgive me, of money, the increase in fund balance there of $524,000. So that includes basically, again, I refer to them as one-time shot in the arm payments, federal COVID-19 response revenue of $1.8 million. So again, that's outside of your general operations. Federal government with these ARPA funds and whatnot came in, and that's the amount of money that was received during 2021. So if you brought in $1.8 million in federal revenue, of that you're only adding to fund balance $500,000. So it's kind of a significant, we took a big hit, a lot of federal money came in there, and the reason for that is, number one, healthcare campuses, nursing homes, county-run nursing homes, census data, census information is down across the board. So if you don't have residents staying there, you're not billing insurance companies, you're not billing Medicaid, Medicare for services provided, but obviously you have tremendous costs just running a healthcare campus. So because of that, obviously the healthcare campus is, no secret to anybody, I don't believe. It is struggling, and the impacts of COVID is, wide-reaching. You've got staffing shortages, which leads to increased costs for staff without residents in order then to cover those costs. So across the board, St. Croix County is no exception to the impact of COVID on nursing homes. Operations need to be taken a look at, at budget time, to figure out how to better manage resources. I know that Kitty Rhodes discussion is being held there of what needs to happen to that campus, because to my knowledge, I don't believe there were any residents in Kitty Rhodes during 2021. So clearly you have a building there, a lot of resources going in there to support that activity without any revenue being brought in, hence the need for these COVID funds. Then jumping on to just the highlights of what's to come, all the fun and excitement. I believe it's page 6 or page 7 here for us. This is the stuff that keeps me really excited as an auditor, is the new accounting and reporting standards that are coming out. There is actually a pretty significant one that is implemented and is effective for 2022, and that's known as GASB 87 or the leasing standards. So Lee and I have had a few different conversations. Anything that's known as a lease, a rental agreement, anything like that. In the past, they've always just been operating leases. We just incur the expense when we pay bills, right? Well, this fun little blurb here of what actually is going to entail boils down to it's going to be a lot of work in order to identify these new leases, what goes into them. Long and short of it, they're going to be capital assets and liabilities. So I won't bore you with all the details, just know that there's going to be a lot of work and effort between CLA on our side and heavily leaning on existing county staff to identify all of these leases. It's very important that we get master contracts and do a lot of analysis on a per lease basis. So if you have multiple leases with one organization, those are all treated individually for the purposes of GASB 87. And if you have enough of them, it's definitely beneficial to look at software packages or relying on outside services in order to track these leases, because we're finding we knew it was going to take a lot of time to implement this accounting standard, and we're finding that it's taking double or even triple the amount of effort than even we thought. And we get excited when we read new accounting standards, or at least some people do. I personally don't, but all the rest of them are little blurbs, just minor things that will just impact the form of your financial statements in total. So outside of that, I have no further comments. If anybody have any additional questions, by all means.
Anyone have questions? Doesn't look like it. Oh, Scott, sorry. Supervisor Counter.
On the leases, is that
Yes, it would be. So it's both any equipment that we lease as well as any, or that we're leasing from somebody else, or if we're in the lessor position.
All right. I don't think we have any other questions. Thank you for the
Appreciate it. Thank you.
presentation. Before we go to our next item, given we have still quite of an agenda left, I think we'll take a 5-minute break. So, quick break. Yep, are we ready? Sorry. Yeah, that's right. So relaxed. All right, I think we will get back to our agenda here now. All right, our next item, item number 5, which I'm told potentially may have a wording change per our legal counsel, but resolution to repurpose the Kitty Rhodes Memorial Dementia Center to a medically monitored withdrawal management facility. And then Bob, I think you're up. Thank you.
Good evening. Yes, so the resolution that you have in your packets is to repurpose the Kitty Rhodes Memorial Memory Care Center to use as a withdrawal management service. And I was going to just briefly tell you how we got to this point, why I'm all excited about this project. For the last year or so, we've been working with the state of Wisconsin on how we could develop a service for people that are suffering from addiction and mental health crisis. How could we serve them at a level of care lower than a hospital setting, one that would allow law enforcement to drop people off at the center if they encountered someone who was intoxicated, and then leave to go on with their work. Relieve emergency department admissions for these kinds of cases, and to save us costs in HHS for purchase services for sending people long distances to get care that we can't provide here in, say, Croix County. So this has been an ongoing effort for over a year now. But earlier this summer, DHS put out a proposal for counties to apply for to develop community-based withdrawal management services. And that proposal that we submitted in response to that is in your board packets. I just submitted that on last Friday. So it explains the effort that we're trying to put forward here. But some things came into alignment in the middle of the summer as we were looking at this proposal. One of those things was we have an interested provider from Minnesota who I worked with in the Twin Cities who does this kind of work, this very specialized level of care. Dr. Sasaki from Kaishin Clinic. I worked with him when I was in Hennepin County. Kaishin Clinic expressed an interest in moving into western Wisconsin to develop withdrawal management services and medication-assisted treatment services, and eventually develop residential treatment and outpatient care for people in our county. Because Kaishin expressed an interest in doing this, we thought, well, now we have a provider that could staff a facility that was 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. We don't have to hire for it. We don't have to fill those staffing needs. And the only thing we needed was a facility to operate this out of. We considered some options. They were very limited in terms of where we could do this, possibly Grace Place, in the Salvation Army's Grace Place. But it was a very small, that would have been a very small effort, and it would have been very difficult to kind of modify well, not difficult, but it would have required some modifications to that facility. So we started looking at what other potential facilities could we use for this amount of money for this purpose. And Kitty Rhodes has been empty since I've been here in the county. I went and looked at the facility with others from HHS and Sandy, the healthcare campus administrator, and we looked at the facility trying to envision how it would serve this population that we're proposing to serve. I used to operate these kinds of facilities, so I knew what to look for. And Kitty Rhodes really is already designed to serve this population, that is, people who would require this kind of care. So fast forwarding a little bit, we started partnering and talking with Western Wisconsin Health Hospital, who has an interest in developing a more robust system of care for people with addiction disorders and mental health disorders. And we started talking with law enforcement around how this might benefit them to have this sort of service available to them locally. spoke with Sandy Hackenmuller, the administrator for Healthcare Campus, to see what kinds of concerns or questions she might have around using this facility in that way. We considered the perceptions within the community that having a facility like this or a service like this that served people with addiction disorders, what the perception of that would be in relation to the nursing home and the residents of the Healthcare Campus. And weighing all of those concerns, questions, and potential benefits, I really don't believe there is a safety risk for any of the residents at the Healthcare Campus if we were to operate this facility out of Kitty Rhodes. The reason I say that is basically this facility, Kitty Rhodes facility, would have no means, there would be no means of gaining access to the rest of the nursing home through that facility. Those doors would be locked. There would be a private entrance for individuals to use to enter the facility who needed help, or for law enforcement to use. And this population, in spite of the perceptions of people with addiction disorders and mental health disorders, this population is not inherently dangerous. They're not inherently criminal in nature. They're people with, as Dr. Anwar and Ailey Peterson said earlier, people with chronic health conditions that require a very specialized service to help them stabilize, safely withdraw from any substance, and then be connected with ongoing care in the community. For those reasons, I don't see a safety risk for the residents of the healthcare campus, though I understand the perception is there that there may be. The benefits to the community would involve serving a population that currently doesn't have that option. They either go to the emergency department, they go to jail, or they go untreated. So they're still in the community. Oftentimes, they're just not being treated. The benefits also include a reduction in emergency department admissions, a reduction in law enforcement time spent either transporting people or waiting while they're medically cleared at a hospital. And it would be a reduction, or we anticipate a reduction in costs for our purchase services in HHS, because we wouldn't be paying to send people long distances to get some higher level of care. The benefit that we mostly are concerned about is providing a better quality of care for our residents and for addressing an issue like addiction in a meaningful way by developing a service that doesn't currently exist in Wisconsin, being a leader in that area and developing something that is sustainable over time and that can be replicated around the state, so that we start to have these regional, short-term stabilization centers for people with addiction disorders and who may have co-occurring mental health disorders. It's a little late in the day, and I'm probably not saying my speech as well as I had practiced. But I do want to, I know you've got the proposal in your packets, you've got the resolution in your packets, and I'd really be interested in answering questions that you might have about it.
Supervisor Fiedler.
Just a couple quick questions. Has this proposal gone through the Hhs Board? And they approved it unanimously?
The Hhs Board recommended that a resolution be brought forward to the Administration Committee for consideration.
And just an observation.
It was on a split vote, I want to clarify.
Okay. And just an observation, you had a great speech. You covered a lot of ground in a hurry. I've been over the same area for the past 4 years as well. It's been a multi-year effort by many people in this county, and I get to it through conversations with the judges and the sheriff's department primarily, and you're looking at it from the HHS perspective. But I know on state steering committees that I'm on, this is the topic every meeting. You and I have talked about this many, many times, and so I think this is a very positive development, a result of a lot of work of a lot of people, and I think it's got great possibilities for the future. And the only thing I would have added to anything is in your descriptions of it, or possibly in the whereas clauses, but I'm not making an amendment, but just to include in, let's say, the partner section of the descriptions that was in one of the documents you gave us, you covered law enforcement, and that's a broad topic, but I would just say always just be particularly solicitous of the needs of the judicial system and the Justice Support Services Department of the county, because they'll be a great beneficiary of this, but we always need to include them in the conversation. But thank you.
Good. Okay, I'm sorry. Along those lines, Supervisor Fiedler, the state of Wisconsin is currently looking at a model called Crisis Now, which includes these short-term stabilization services as part of that model. It's an effort to rethink and restructure crisis care services in our state, which is needed because right now it's very fragmented, very costly. It's poorly designed. So this Crisis Now model is a larger effort by the state to look at regional development of crisis response systems, which this would be a part of a system that would complement our already existing ARPA positions and the other county-operated positions that we currently offer. The other real quick piece is with the reference to the courts. I'm on a steering committee along with invited Shar Lopez to be a part of that steering committee, but it's a state court response to mental health and addiction, and this response is in relation to designing diversionary programs for people that would normally cycle through courts and emergency departments and jail and instead divert them to getting health care for their conditions. And this would be one of those options supported by the state court system, at least in early planning, that I think would get their attention and receive their support as we go forward with that planning.
Supervisor Burning.
So the dementia wing will be converted to a response for people with drug and alcohol addiction or withdrawal, and to treat them, basically. What are we going to, I mean, we haven't had patients in there for 2 years, and I've talked to people in the medical field who have said that they've tried to refer patients to Kitty Rhodes, and clearly staffing is an issue. So how are we going to, if we can't staff it for as what it was intended to be, how are, like, we're contracting with an organization, but why don't we contract with an organization to have this dementia center as we've originally intended it and built it to be? Go ahead, and then I got a few more.
All right. We're not aware of an organization that could staff it for dementia care for the same reasons that we're having trouble staffing it. There just isn't the capacity within the care system to staff that kind of service area. Now, this is kind of a specialized area of healthcare, so there's very limited options in terms of even finding a program to operate it. I just happen to know one from Minnesota who happens to be interested in moving into Wisconsin through this doctor, and I think it literally was, she was reaching out to me to say, how could we do this in Wisconsin? And that's when we got this grant opportunity, and it started to become possible.
So then how that's going to, I'm assuming that this is, I don't want to assume, so that's why I'm asking. The revenues that are kind of off balance right now because of that, is this going to help offset the operating, or how is this relationship going to work? How much do we have to give? What are they getting out of it? And I realize this is for the community, but I want to, like, that's a good question to ask considering we're cutting benefits and we're, you know, looking at all this stuff. So that's my next question. Thank you.
We would fund this effort through the grant funds and through the ARPA funds that were already allocated to us last year. There wouldn't be any tax dollars used to fund it. The effort wouldn't bring in any substantial revenue. What it might do is offset some of the costs for utilities and snow removal and facility costs. But other than that, it's a service that would provide, it would meet a need in the community, not be a revenue-generating thing. But it's also not going to cost tax dollars to operate it.
So when you say tax dollars, you mean like
Levy.
County levy? Yeah, because the ARPA money is like my kids paying on that and myself. So then the other thing is, so this doesn't impact the county budget per se from our local taxpayers, but this seems to be a reactionary, like we seem to be reacting to a lot of problems. I talked to someone worked for the county quite a number of years ago, probably when I was in high school, and the sheriff at that time was leasing out jail space, and now this wave of drugs, from legal to illegal to whatever it is. I mean, we are reacting to things, but we're not trying to find what we can do to, like, what do we have to do to stop this? What is causing this? Because this is an insane amount of people that are impacted. Meth, heroin, I mean, what are we doing to look at, and maybe not you specifically, and I'm not pointing the finger at you, but we have to start looking at how can we prevent people from this. This is just costing so much money. And I was just talking with a sheriff here in Wisconsin, not our sheriff, so I won't throw him under the bus and I won't name names. But when do we start looking at self-responsibility again and trying to figure out how we, I don't know, we're just spending so much money on reactionary reactions to problems, and we don't seem to be getting any better. 30 years later from when I was in high school and meth was a thing, and now we're building buildings for dementia care. We can't staff it, and now more drug reaction. So do you know of anything in the future? Like, what do we got to do?
Yes, I do, actually. I mean, the solutions are there for us. The current system that we're in is very reactionary. It has been for decades. It's responding to crisis, and the funding to respond to those crises tends to go with whatever the crisis of the day is. So methamphetamine's a problem, the funding comes in for methamphetamine treatment, but you can't treat other drugs with the money. The same with opioids to some extent. It's a system of care that's not it's not moving us forward. We're not gaining ground significantly. What this particular service does in that respect is it doesn't look at just detoxifying people and saying, off you go. It's a matter of medically withdrawing people. So using medications to help ease the withdrawal, to make sure people are safe. You can die from alcohol withdrawal. So that's part of the risk in transporting people and sending them off to places that don't provide medication. And it's offering medications that assist with ongoing reduction in craving and ongoing reduction in the desired effect if they do use the drug. But the bigger part of this picture is fitting it into the other newer interventions that we've already developed and saying that how do we connect people from that point where they're treated for their addiction and their withdrawal, how do we take them from that point and move them to an ongoing recovery plan so that there's an actual plan in place, care coordination, case management, peer recovery support are all components of this through our ARPA-funded positions. So we would work with people the moment they came into this facility, safely withdraw them from whatever drug they're on, treat their mental health condition at the same time, and then connect them with whatever the resources were that fit their particular needs, whether that's recovery housing, whether it's employment, whether it's treatment, ongoing treatment in an outpatient or residential facility. It would depend on the person. But the idea here is not just to treat the current symptoms and release them like what might happen in a hospital or jail. It would be to view this as a starting point in their recovery plan and really have a recovery plan that makes sense to that person and follow them through the duration of their need. In order to treat addiction effectively, we have to look at it in the same way as was mentioned earlier, in the same way that we look at other chronic disease. We have to manage it in a similar way as other chronic disease. through prevention, through acute care when needed, and then stepping people down in intensity of care with maintenance throughout the need that they have. Maybe years, maybe a few months, it's hard to say. We don't have a system that supports that right now. But however, what we're trying to do with DHS is to look at a coherent and comprehensive system of care for this population with this particular need and say, how do we treat this effectively? We know how, but how do we design a system within the state to treat these people effectively and help them connect for ongoing care without losing track of them, without having them cycle through the same repeated acute care settings over and over again, which is costly and results in poor outcomes. We know what to do. Part of what this effort is how do we build that system? And this would be a significant step forward in doing that, I think.
Just in a follow-up to that, I think what I'm looking at is how can, like, the people in the folks in your field, the professionals in your field, you've got to maybe not you particularly, but someone who studies human behavior and what causes people to go and seek out drugs and alcohol. I mean, I can tell you why I seek out alcohol, but it's not for the same reason that somebody who's completely addicted to it and needs treatment and needs to not be on it. It just seems like we are doing what we can to help them after they've been addicted. But if you talk to kids in Hudson High School, and I'm sure that's the same across this county, and I'm sure it's the same across this country, drugs are prevalent, and it's known. Mm-hmm. So what's causing that? I mean, I have a few guesses, but I'm no expert. But how can we no longer or make it so that 20 or 30 years from now, we're not talking about these same issues? You know, the clean, lather, rinse, repeat, whatever, you know, like that's good that we get them and we fix them, and then we have to tail someone or track them from now until they're 85 or whatever life expectancy is. What would you say from your standpoint, what do we need to do from society's perspective? Or do you have somebody that can come and talk to us and say, here are the differences between what was going on in 1985 to 1996 when the meth epidemic hit in 96, and then here are the 17 factors that cause a 17-year-old to want to do drugs or go into their mom and dad's liquor cabinet and start that cycle. I mean, that's really the crux of what I'm getting at. Because this is heart-wrenching, but at the same time, there's got to be a way to fix this from the base, maybe not the core.
The short answer to that is that we have a very different system of care for people with these disorders than we do for people with other physical health disorders. We have a very different response to them. We have a very different perception of who they are. And the analogy I use that I've heard from a doctor before is if you walk into a hospital with chest pains, you get one response. If you walk into a hospital intoxicated or with a mental health condition, you get a much different response. That's the issue. How do you build a system of care that is consistent, that has standards, that has requirements for how to treat these conditions, as opposed to facilities that pop up all over the place with different philosophies and different understandings of how to deal with it? We have to build a system of care that is responsive to the science and is responsive to the biological components of addiction. It's a very complicated disease, and the social implications of why people use drugs are ever-changing and evolving. So it's not a thing you can hit with a dart, but it's something that is those social determinants of health that you hear about. Those are the contributing factors: poverty, stress, economic conditions, family history, genetics. All of those things play into it. But we need a system of care that treats the disorder like other chronic diseases are managed. We have to manage it in a similar way consistently, and you cannot do that with a healthcare system that's grant-funded or chases after the crisis of the day. You have to have a system that's there, that responds the same way in an effective science-based fashion. That's my short answer. There's no easy solution, or I'd have solved it by now. But
And I want to thank you for taking my questions. You know I'm never easy, so thank you.
no, that's okay. They're good questions.
Okay. Supervisor Cowner.
I guess I had a few things. First on the dementia care, I know we've also, we're in competition. Amory built a pretty large facility up at the old school site downtown, and I think we've had a few in St. Croix County too that have went up. I'm just trying to think of the locations where everything is, but have we checked, are there bed counts on those dementia units? Have we checked on, is there any documentation as far as percentages of vacancies in any of these other facilities? And again, they're on, those are mostly all commercial, or they're private businesses.
For dementia care, I haven't looked into that specifically. Now we have Sandy and we have Shar here. I don't know if either of you could, or Kristen, as long as you're here, you might have the answer to that.
There's some confusion as to the dementia care unit. So in 2020, we received our home and community-based waiver so that we could accept family care. And that's what we were waiting for. So in 2020, before March, by the way, we moved the people that we had in our dementia unit that were memory care residents up to our second floor of Orchard View, which is a memory care unit for dementia. There's a possibility of 28 people on that unit, and right now that unit is almost full, okay? And then in March of 2020, all of a sudden, we have this thing happen to us called COVID, and our building was locked down. The doors were locked, nobody was allowed in and out. I don't know if you guys know that happened to us, but that's what happened. And we still have to wear masks and goggles all day. All our doors are locked, and we have to screen every person that comes in our building according to CDC and DHS. The other issue is they stopped doing surgeries for knees and hips and those types of things. So the skilled facility census dropped by attrition because we didn't have a lot of rehab patients coming in and out. So when you're talking about assuming things, there's an assumption that we lost money because we just lost money. No, we lost money because we couldn't run our business like we normally run our business. I'm running at 10 Medicare right now, which is a huge, huge difference from a year ago, because now I'm able to admit people that can rehab, that can be taken into our facility. We rehab them and send them out of our facility. The dementia unit would have had people that had masks, COVID, those kinds of things with behaviors. You're not going to keep masks on those people. During the COVID years, which we still deal with, we lost some staff to, believe it or not, Anderson's, because they were tired of what was going on with COVID. So it's not an issue of not being able to put people in COVID or in the dementia unit. It's an issue of putting staff in there, because the ratio was going to be 3 staff members to 10 people, because they would have been high behaviors. So I can't hire, that would take me, I'd have to hire over 16 people to fill that unit. So, for staff. So I think that's something that we determined isn't possible right now, because I'm working so hard to fill the health center and other things. So I just kind of wanted to clear that up. So I hope that helps you understand.
Yes, it does. And thank you for doing that.
Yes. And then, so when this came about, I will tell you, I have a lot of respect for this man. He knows a lot about what he's doing. It's not in my wheelhouse. I mean, I deal with the elderly. And yes, we do have some elderly alcoholics, I will tell you, we do. And we've had some of them in our facility, but I have the utmost confidence in what he's saying, and I know that the citizens could use this service. So why not use Kitty Rhodes for that? Because that's something that we could do right now with the unit and benefit the citizens of St. Croix County. Okay? Any questions for? Yeah.
Did you have a follow-up?
There's a few questions, but I can.
Okay.
Okay.
Okay,
I'll
Supervisor
try to
Long.
be brief. So I'd like to assume at some point in the past, there was an assessment made, and we determined from a county standpoint that there was need for a dementia center.
Absolutely.
Okay, so we built the dementia center. So now my question is, before we just say, oh, let's do something else with it, is there still a need for a dementia center, and are we jumping the gun by saying, let's use it for some other purpose?
I won't be able to staff it. I'm serious about staffing. Right now, I have agency staff filling in some of my positions. We're unable to hire staff because McDonald's is paying what, $17 an hour? Walmart, $17.50 for the night shift, $27 an hour to work at Anderson's. So that's part of the issue. Healthcare is struggling everywhere in the United States with the workforce crisis. So we're doing creative things to attract staff, and we're getting involved more in our high school level to bring those staff in early.
I just wondered is that more of a short-term issue, and will that in some way resolve itself maybe in another 4 or 5 years? I just don't want to, and nobody knows that.
No.
But I hesitate to give up on this dementia center if there is truly a need in the county, and just switch gears quickly.
The intention, Supervisor, would be to, or Chair, Mr. Chair, I'm sorry, would be to use this facility for this purpose during the life of the grant. The contracted provider has the intention of building or leasing a facility of their own eventually and operating it in St. Croix County. So we're only looking at a temporary repurposing of this facility while we establish it, develop sustainable funding for it, and then move it. The provider has an interest in moving it to another location. So while the staffing issues exist, while the workforce issues exist, we could use it for this purpose temporarily. We could add, we believe, in talking with DHS, we can add a license to the existing license without removing any of the current licensing, operate it under this additional license for a period of roughly 2 years, and then allow it to hopefully evolve into the community through the provider that we're contracting with.
Supervisor Kellner, you had a follow-up?
Thanks.
Just a couple questions on the service for the people that would be coming in need of that type of service. What term of time, whether it be on an average, or what do you see as a maximum term that patients would actually be there, and what do you see as an average for the revolving people through it?
Yeah, that's a good question. The average length of stay in my experience in operating these facilities in the Twin Cities was about just over 2 days, the average length of stay. Now, with different drugs, there are different withdrawal protocols for like opioids. There's a much longer, prolonged, I should say, withdrawal period, so they may stay a little longer. Some folks need one night of stabilization, and they're able to function well enough to move them to a lower level of care. So it's going to be dependent on ASAM criteria, these American Society of Addiction Medicine criteria, that determines level of care placement based on the severity of withdrawal symptoms and other conditions. So we would expect an average of about 2 days for each person. 2 to 3, I would say.
And then, would this be just for substance abuse and alcoholism abuse, or would you also be looking at mental evaluations for other types of schizophrenia, whatever it is.
Right. This facility would treat any drug use, so any drug, alcohol included, but any drug, and look at co-occurring mental health disorders that people might present with. There's a severity level that has to be looked at. So if somebody's too severe, that is, their symptoms are so severe that they couldn't be served at this level of care, they would be referred to a hospital for that higher level of care, whether it be for mental health and or addiction disorders. But we would look at this, we would look at the eligibility criteria based on ASAM criteria to determine that. And subsequently, too, if their symptoms are less severe, we would step them down in care as quickly as we could. So, but yes, we would look at both mental health, addiction, and any drug use.
Then is this, I'm not sure if you've been familiar with what's been going on at the old Amory Hospital. Is this anything similar to programs that they have had, or if I don't know if they're still continuing there, but do you know anything about the program that they had there?
I don't specifically know about that program, but I can say this would be the first service of its kind in Wisconsin. My guess is that these additional service areas, like serving people with co-occurring disorders, mental health and addiction, and the care coordination and the peer recovery support, all of those additional behavioral health supports, along with medication-assisted treatment options, that's something that's not being done currently in Wisconsin. And it's something that we hope, and the state is planning to include in the Medicaid benefit set eventually, so there would be a sustainable funding source for this level of care. That's the sustainability piece, along with contracting, potentially contracting with other counties to make it a regional service.
With that, or as this contractor comes in to take on the responsibilities and to operate this, would they be looking at doing then on a longer term, if we're looking at 2 to 3 days, if it's a longer term contract, then are we looking at transferring patients over the Twin Cities? And if so, have we looked at the, if that's allowable with the statutes for transfer of patients that way?
The challenge can come in, well, the idea, let me just try and say it this way. Our intention is not to create more beds. It's to treat a condition effectively in its acute state and then transition people to whatever service they might need after that. It might not be a residential facility at all. We look at all options when it comes to residential care because the resources are so scarce. So it's a problem with, I know the drug court this morning, we were in a meeting where the judge said that we can't find residential placements. There's a wait list everywhere. Long term, the idea here would be to be more responsive to the immediate needs of the individual, make sure they're stable, and get them some support of some kind immediately following that acute treatment, whether that's residential care or outpatient or some combination of other kinds of support. But it's difficult to say. I mean, there may be circumstances where we would transport somebody to Minnesota for ongoing care if that was something that their insurance covered or something that they were able to do. But it's kind of on a case-by-case basis with that. There are residency standards, too, for certain elements of that.
I mean, it seems to me like this is a creative and logical solution to a problem that we've been hearing about for a while in our community. I know a few years ago when I was serving on the Public Protection Committee or Health and Human Services recently, I mean, these are issues that keep coming up. There's a piece of the population that isn't being served, and it's impacting not only our sheriff's office and our public safety, but Health and Human Services and other assets of the community. I mean, I can see in your discussion and your description of it, I can see your vision and your passion for this. I think this is we have an opportunity to be a leader here, as you mentioned, so I think this is something that we should move forward with. I would make a motion to approve the resolution to repurpose the Kitty Rhodes Memorial Memory Care, I know the language is wrong, Memory Care Center to a medically monitored withdrawal management facility.
Second?
And just before the members vote, would someone be willing to make a motion to change the word dementia to memory care throughout the resolution? It is a mistake that I made in the resolution, and so it should say the Kitty Rhodes Memorial Memory Care Center versus Dementia Center.
I think that's a typo that we can just correct.
Okay.
I don't know that we need a motion on that. If there's a typo, we just fix them.
Both in the title and the
type.
text. Before we go to a vote, could I make?
Yep, Supervisor Fiedler.
I'll be very short, but just an observation. Supervisor Burning was very eloquent in his questions regarding the responsiveness to the drug issue, and our HHS director was also eloquent in his discussion and description of what we're doing. And what I'm going to say, I don't want to be political, but I do want to be damning. Our federal government has failed us. Not the county government, not the city government, not the state government, but our federal government has failed us in prevention. And if we made this a Manhattan Project for America to stop drugs coming into this country, fentanyl from China, and if we had rules following the Constitution and civil liberties that would permit us to do certain things with regard to the repression of those who sell meth, particularly in our area, we could not need any of the things that you've so eloquently discussed. So I would say that it's not nothing for us to do, nothing for us to vote on, it's not our issue, but our country, our federal government, Republicans and Democrats have failed us utterly in this topic.
Okay, any other discussion? Supervisor Long.
Real quick, first of all, I love this program. I think it's great. I congratulate you guys in putting this all together. Two quick questions, though, regarding the Kitty Rhodes Memory Center. Do you feel like you thoroughly explored other options as to other facilities that might work? And then also, apparently, there was a split vote in the Hhs Board. I'm curious as to those that voted against moving this forward. What were their concerns? And you can be brief. It's okay.
Sure. To the first point, what was the first point? The other options we were looking at and considering prior to this grant opportunity and prior to Kai-Shin being interested was looking at Grace Place, because it's a former nursing home and was designed it was designed to meet all, most of the licensing requirements. So we could have potentially used maybe 4, maybe 5 beds there, but it was, again, prior to this grant coming along, it would have been difficult to pay for the staff required to operate it. The concerns that I heard at the HHS meeting were really around the safety piece, having this kind of service right next to the residents at the healthcare campus. So I think the primary concerns are around perception of risk associated with operating a facility like this near vulnerable people. I understand that perception. I understand those concerns because I've heard them my whole career, and sometimes they're justified. I don't think if this kind of program is operated properly, that there are those kinds of health risks. First of all, we're going to screen people when they come. We're going to make sure they are eligible for this kind of care through their symptoms, through their, they're not violent, et cetera. I mean, there are certain criteria, admission criteria that we would look at. So the safety concerns I understand, but I don't think are real in terms of this particular project.
One last.
One last.
We're here anyway, so why not, right? Okay. So I want to say thank you to Supervisor Fiedler for bringing that one point out for sure, on how we've been failed at a lot of levels, not necessarily your folks. When it comes to drugs, we need to throw more of those people away for life, I feel. So That's just my feelings. My question is, the initial grant lasts us how long?
It's a 2-year grant.
2-year grant. So after the 2 years, and I'm not just asking county taxpayers, I'm talking the taxpayers in general, what are we committing our taxpayers to after the 2 years if we want to continue this program going after the 2-year grant period through the ARPA, I think it was? So.
Yeah, so we're not asking for any taxpayer support for this effort beyond the 2-year grant. Our hope is that we get buy-in from the state on their efforts to reform the Crisis Now model and Medicaid funding that would support our efforts that we established through this grant process. By the time we get to the end of the grant, my hope is we have a sustainable funding source that the provider can then use to develop and operate their own facility outside of using ours. There's also the potential for regional, like I said, collaboration where other counties could contract with us for whatever number of beds we agree to, where they would pay a certain fee that would still be lower than what they're paying now for hospitals or other crisis care venues. And they would be served local, those people would be served locally where they don't have to wait, the law enforcement officers don't have to wait around while medical clearance is established or while whatever procedures have to occur in the current system, and they could just drop people off and leave once that person is admitted, which would be right away, usually.
The long-term sustainable funding source you mentioned is a change to the state to allow Medicare, Medicaid funding for...
Medicaid funding.
Medicaid funding.
And the efforts are underway for that. We did it in Minnesota. It took a lot of effort to do it in Minnesota, but they now have a per diem rate of about $590 a day that Medicaid pays per patient per day for withdrawal management services at this level of care that we're proposing. Not to say that we will end up in the same position as Minnesota, but it's possible to do that. We have buy-in from the state in terms of at least wanting to do this. The Medicaid director is on the steering committee with the state court system that I'm a part of, who has interest in doing this. It's a matter of negotiating with CMS and amending the state plan and developing a statute or a rule that applies to this level of care and funding it through Medicaid.
One more question?
Well, the one thing that you brought up was that you're looking at this currently as a temporary, to get things, you know, like a pilot program. Mm-hmm. And I'm wondering if we should look at the language of the motion as being a pilot or not.
There is language in the resolution, line 47 through 49, that indicates that it would be a medically monitored withdrawal management facility for a short period of time, approximately 2 years. So hopefully that addresses your concern.
All right, are we ready to vote? Okay, all those in favor of the motion signify by saying aye. 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 Opposed? Motion carried. Thanks, Bob.
Thank you.
All right, our next item, consideration of regrade request for IT specialist endpoint 1 and 2. Audrey, I think this is you.
Yeah, the background information kind of spells it out for you, but basically looking at providing promotion opportunities for individuals after they've gained different mastery of skills and knowledge in specific areas or departments. And one of those departments would be the IT specialist endpoint position. Currently has already started taking on additional roles and responsibilities. And so we wanted to create a new position within that area as an endpoint specialist 2, so that after 2 years of service with the county and the mastery of additional endpoint systems, an employee in the level 1 position could promote into a level 2 position. Grading it from a 63 would be the specialist 1 position into a grade of 64 when they promote into the specialist 2 position.
Any questions from anybody? Just comment that I think anytime we have an opportunity to reward employees for seeking out expansion of their skills. I think that's something that's really valuable for us as an organization. So I honestly would like to see more of that in the future. All right. Motion? Anyone? All right. To approve, I'm assuming. A motion by Supervisor Long, second by Supervisor Counter to, I'm assuming, approve the regrade request? Okay. All those in favor? Aye. Opposed? All right, motion carried.
No discussion.
Oh, do you want discussion?
No.
There wasn't any questions. I was trying to read the table here. There wasn't any really comments. Okay.
Didn't hear call for it, so.
Our next item, Public Information Officer presentation. Adam.
Wait 1 second here. All right, so all of you know me as the Public Information Officer or the PIO. Some of you may not be familiar with my background or the roles that I actually do to fulfill my job here. So I'm just going to go over a little bit of a background of myself and my position. I started in late May of 2020, right in the middle of the pandemic. Within the first month of working with St. Croix County, I communicated about 2 states of emergency and unfortunately the first death due to the COVID-19 pandemic in our county. So it was really kind of trial by fire to start with, so it was an interesting start to the position. I'm a UW Stout alumni with a background in communications, marketing, design, graphic design and web design, and then photography and video production. Prior to starting with the county, I worked with the state of Minnesota. I was a content manager for their website, for their IT organization, so I managed all of their online websites, their internal websites. I also managed the mn.gov portal, and I played a key role in the branding of the state of Minnesota and the state of Minnesota agencies. In my previous roles, I've worked in media sales. I led a team of creatives producing television commercials. I launched websites and products. I've promoted local businesses, and I developed video training libraries. So let me go to the next slide here. So public information officers, they're really the messengers for government agencies. Although my title is public information officer, it's really a combination of multiple roles that typically make up your typical communications team at other organizations. So within my role as PIO, it's really a combination of a designer, a copywriter, and media and public relations. So what I typically do, what we kind of, and I talk with Ken about this all the time, is even though this role is multiple positions rolled up into one, the reason that we can make it work is we leverage content managers and subject matter experts throughout the county within the different departments. So I work with them to try to provide guidance on and strategy on how we communicate, how we can best communicate their services to our residents, and how we can communicate their services to our employees internally as well. All right. And I'm going to try to make this quick, so I'm giving you guys the truncated version of this because we're late in the day. So some of the goals that we have for our communications is we want to make sure that our communications are simple, concise, and accessible. Accessible, sometimes that's a term that people don't really fully understand. Accessible can mean multiple things. So it's really looking at how are we speaking? Are we using plain language? Technically, government agencies use a lot of industry jargon. We try to simplify that. We try to get everything down to about an 8th grade reading level if possible, Sometimes what we do is so technical that it's really difficult to do that, but that's really what we strive for. Accessible also means for people with developmental disabilities, people who are low vision, blind, who require assistive technology in order to consume the content that we have on our websites. We are required by law to be accessible, so we strive to meet the WCAG 2.0 standards. I'm not going to get into the details about all that. You can ask me later if you do have questions about that. So some of that really goes into kind of color choices, making sure color contrast, making sure our documents can be read by screen readers. I'll get into a little bit more on that when we get into later slides. To be helpful, it sounds pretty obvious, but we want to make sure that we're being helpful. We want to, Supervisor Burning's point, I know earlier you said, let's be proactive. I believe that's kind of one of the sentiments you were talking about. And that's really what we should be doing with our communications is don't be reactive and address a problem. Look at where we can provide information so if people, they don't have to come directly to us and call us. They can find it on our website. They can find it on our social media. Be consistent and be transparent. So we are definitely working. I feel that we have been very consistent and transparent, but we're making strives to be even more so. Some of that is just how we're handling our content on our website. With our new design, we're trying to make sure that things are more visible for people. Even though they may have been there, we're trying to make it easier for people to find. And be engaging. Being engaging, we can put all the information out there, but if people aren't going to read it, it's not really going to fulfill its purpose. So part of it is really making sure how can we turn this information into a story? How can we put that human element into it? And that's what we're working with our staff on. So what have we done so far? This is a pretty big list, but this is not a comprehensive list. So we've developed communication plans and strategies. We've worked with different departments to develop these plans and strategies. And sometimes it's about their communication as a whole. Sometimes it's just about a specific project or an event that we're doing. The mental health awareness event that we worked on with Supervisor Fiedler, that had a communication plan and strategy around that. I've advised leadership and staff, definitely public-facing staff, around communication best practices. We've developed connections between departments, trying to break down some of those silos and making sure that we're combining our resources and our efforts to be more efficient in how we communicate. One of the first things that I've done when I had started was we had implemented an employee quarterly town hall. That was really an effort to make sure that staff are more involved in what we're doing at the county. They know what different departments are doing. They know what policy changes are happening from HR and from the county board. So we implement those quarterly so staff are aware of that information. Those are all posted out on the bridge. You can go back and watch all of the recorded versions, and you can join our upcoming ones. We'll have one at the end of September or beginning of October, but that information will be on the bridge. I've helped organize and communicate about some major events. I'm not going to go through that whole list, but you can take a look at it. We've developed and administered surveys. We've doubled our online reach with our social media, specifically with our St. Croix County account, our Parks account. All those have doubled their reach. We've made updates to be more accessible. That's kind of what I was talking about earlier with some of our documents, our color use. It sounds small, but it does make a big impact. And we say that we're in the process. I wrote this before we launched our website. We have launched our new design for our website. You should have all received an email about that. And we are in the process of launching new social media channels. Specifically, the next one would be Instagram. So what are our plans moving forward? Now that we've gone through that design phase of the website, that's really to make sure people can find the information that's already out there. But how do we optimize that? So we're working with each one of the departments to make sure that we're accurately and concisely communicating about the services that they offer. That goes back to that plain language. It goes back to just simple hierarchy of content. We're going to update our employee intranet. Again, make information easier for our employees to find, because when they know what services we offer, they can communicate it to our residents. Create clearer explanations of our services. To go along with that, we're also going to create short videos to explain our services. That's part of an effort that came out of our strategic planning. And then create a county-wide annual report. At every county board meeting, we have a couple departments will give an annual report. We're going to try to consolidate that into one comprehensive report that we have at the end of the year, and then we'll send that out electronically to people. I know we're looking at other ways that we reach. Maybe it's a postcard that we have to let people know initially we're starting to do this, but we're looking at creating an online comprehensive report. Create more opportunities for people to subscribe to our news. That would also include that annual report. And then create more opportunities to receive feedback. Expand use of our social media. That was that Instagram that I was talking about. We're also looking at maybe some other breakout Facebook pages based off of different topic areas that we have. And then create more training opportunities for our content managers, going back to that plain language piece and customer service. The new website design, again, you all received an email letting you know that we're launching this. So it's really looking at how do we, going back to that accessibility piece, color usage. A lot of the colors that we're using were very hard on the eyes. There wasn't a lot of white space. The information was out there, but it was hard for people to focus on. We softened the color palette a little bit. I know Ken kind of laughs at me when I start talking about colors, but they do make a big impact. Create more white space. It helps with that hierarchy. So then once we start updating that content, it's really going to make a big difference. The next steps, we'll be looking at adding, well, we won't be looking at, we will be adding a chatbot feature to improve search functionality. And then we're also doing a review of the metadata on each one of our pages to improve our SEO along with, and that's search engine optimization, sorry, I'm also guilty of industry jargon, along with the content on the page. And that was the fastest that I could go through that. Does anyone have any questions?
Supervisor Bernie.
So I explored the website a couple of times since the launch, and very nicely done, especially in the presentation of information. Certainly pops out. Like you were saying, Adam, the information has always been there. It's just that it was pretty hard, pretty harsh, just visually. So nice job on the aesthetics. And then the fact that you've been able to double park, some of our park engagement, that's awesome. Nice job. That's all I want to say is nice job.
And I can't take credit for doubling the park. I provide guidance to community development, but Ryan Hogland, who manages their, sorry, I'm name dropping him, but who manages their parks page, he's done a great job doing that. So I do need to give credit where credit is due. One of the things that I did want to note is in a previous meeting, it was the last county board meeting, Supervisor Burning, you had mentioned about our register of deeds. They had brought up property fraud alerts. So if you scroll down on the page, that inspired us to create a section that's a did you know section. So there's a lot of services that we offer at the county that people have no idea that we have. So we created a section. It's just a little banner section. It says, did you know? It's going to be a brief line. This first one's about the property fraud alert with a button that takes you to that page. We're going to coincide that with posts on our social media. We don't have that one out there yet, but that will be coming. And then we'll swap that out. Currently, we're looking at swapping out monthly, but then as we have more ideas that we generate, and if you have ideas, please let me know. and then we'll put those into the rotation.
Supervisor Fiedler.
Just very quickly, I've certainly enjoyed working with Adam since he came on board. It has been a busy 2 years for you, Adam, but thanks for all your efforts. I'm particularly appreciative of your one comment of future things to do, where we're going to have a countywide annual report. And I'm sure the administrator will have a great deal of material he'll put into that directly, as well as what you'll get from your various department heads. As I've gone to different meetings, particularly I think at the WCA annual meetings, a report like that I've thought is just tremendous is the Sheboygan County report. So if you have not become familiar with that, you might want to get hold of a copy of their annual report. I think it's exceptionally well done, and that we could reproduce it. And it basically has short sections from each of the department heads, from the county administrator there, and from other key participants in county government. But I think that's a great new initiative.
Thank you for that feedback. And I can't take full credit for that one either. It's a team effort. I know part of that had been discussion with Ken and Supervisor Long. I believe that you two had a discussion about that. I know it was something that we've been thinking about for a while, but that is something that definitely moved that conversation forward. So thank you all for that feedback.
Any other comments or questions for Adam? All right, thank you.
Thank you. Tried to keep it short.
All right, our next item, resolution approving 2023-2027 capital project plan and funding for 2023 capital improvement projects. Leah.
Okay, so after our committee of the whole meeting, we took the recommendations that you all have provided, and we updated the 2023 to 2027 capital improvement plan. A couple changes that I wanted to point out to you guys today. One of the changes is project 10109. It's that first one highlighted in the 55,000. We did move that from 2023 to 2024 for the landscaping for the nursing home. And that was one of the recommendations. And then the next one for project 121 for 800,000, that fire sprinkler system over in Baldwin, we did move that from 2027 up to 2024. So those are one of the changes. It won't affect the 2023 budget, but just note that was one of the changes. And then there's one other change that was made down in parks, and that was project 10075, the bike ped plan. We did move that from 2023 to 2024 as we did not receive the grant funding for that, so we will try for that again next year. And then, so that is on that for 2024. So for 2023, those were the only changes that we have made. If you guys do review and approve this tonight, we would really only be approving the spend for 2023, but the entire plan for future years. And we will continue to work on the projects from 2024 through 2027.
Supervisor Burning.
Yeah, I'll move to approve the resolution approving 2023 to 2027 capital project plan and funding for the 2023 capital improvement projects.
Who wants it? Second, Supervisor Counter, second. Okay. Any discussion? Supervisor Fiedler.
I don't have a specific amendment that I'm going to propose, but an issue that's much like the library issue, which has been changing every month with the facts we're playing with, an issue that has come up as a result of our building annex deals with this part of the building and what will happen in the future years, particularly relative to the courtrooms and their build-out. And but again, things are changing every week, so at our KIP meeting that we had a couple of weeks ago, nothing was provided in the KIP during that discussion for funding to specifically build out the courtrooms. Now, our chairman of the building committee is here, Supervisor Counter, and at least to very broadly describe it, we have our bond issue that's out there. Initial projections of costs came in. They were higher than our bond issue, so we put some money at our last meeting of this committee from the KIP, into the KIP from the ARPA funds. We put all the ARPA funds into the KIP, and that offset a lot of the projected additional costs. but there were still additional costs beyond that that we had to address. So we made about 10, excuse me, about 10 cuts to critical issues. Among those cuts that we approved were cutting back on when we built out the courtrooms. And without getting into a whole long discussion of the merits or demerits of that and what some of the options are for what the courts will do, I'll just say that those players in the court system, not necessarily just the judges, but those players in the court system, I think, are very concerned about what will happen to the courtroom build-out in the future. So one way we could address it is add something to the KIP, but I'm not prepared enough to make an amendment to this, but hopefully we'll have another opportunity to either discuss it or make an amendment maybe in December to this, or bring it up at the full board when it comes up. But I would like to just bring to the attention of our committee that I think we should address it. Now, one of the things I've suggested to, I'll call him Supervisor Chairman Counter of the Building Committee, is that because of the recent changes that were just made in our projections of how this floor would be built out, it affects really the wisdom of our initial judgments on where to put the DA, where to put the clerk of court, where to put the juvenile issues, where to put the commissioners. One change affects another thing. So I had suggested to him that we bring together the parties that are affected by our latest changes, which do not anticipate building out in the near term the courtrooms, and get their opinion as to, as a result of that, what should be done in the future before we completely and totally lock in our plans for this building and this floor and the second floor. So there, again, it's not an amendment, but I just wanted to discuss that it's a big issue and should be probably raised again, and if I raise it or somebody else raises it, I'll try to have all my facts and figures in order. Thank you.
Yeah, I think what my plan is for that, Supervisor Fiedler, is that we're going to know in February whether we're able to include some of those items in yet. So I don't want to add them to the KIP if I'm already going to be able to cover them. So that's how come they're not on the list yet. So if we're able to include it within the current project, they will be built in 2024. That's when the remodeling part is going to happen. If they're not able to be included within the current scope of the project and they have to become a separate KIP item, in May of 2023, when we start the KIP, I can add them to the project then, and, you know, it depends on dollar-wise, but they could still be done in 24 or probably 25. So timing-wise, there really isn't any delay. We have time in 2023 to decide what extra items we want to put into the KIP for 2024.
I agree with that.
Yeah, so I think we're going to be fine time-wise, but that's how come you're not seeing them in there yet.
All right, any other discussion? All right, we're ready to vote. All in favor of the resolution signify by saying aye. 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 Opposed? Motion's carried. Okay, next item, resolution approving county administrator's work plan and work plan report. Ken?
Yeah, so this is an annual resolution. I sit down with the county board chair and the chair of the admin committee. We go over the work plan. They have said that I have satisfactorily completed the work plan for the past year. And we look forward then to what some items might be for the next year's work plan. So that's built into the resolution. So there's 5 work plan items that have been identified. One is related to budgeting. We want to make sure that we're continuing our pattern of decreased budget tax levy rates. And so we do have a big challenge with the additional debt coming on in 2023. So that's one of the challenges for me, is to find that solution. Communication, we want to create more outreach on the budget. So Adam's going to do that one for me. And yeah. Number 3 is a services review. So we're going through the mandated services review with all the departments now, so that's going to continue over the next several months. But the important part is to bring forward those policy changes then that are identified at the committee meetings. Facilities, this one's probably the toughest one, is to keep the government center building project on time and on budget. It's really a 2-year goal. This will extend over across into the following year also. But hopefully that on budget is a little bit more subjective. What's authorized by the county board. And then employees, create an enhanced onboarding plan for new employees. So we've been talking about this one for a little while, and I really want this one on the radar, that this is something that we want to do to make the employees feel welcomed into the organization and maybe help with some of the retention that we have. So this one Audrey's going to do for me. So.
Yep, Supervisor Feather.
I was thinking maybe I should be checking into the Dementia Center here, because I can't remember exactly what we did in May. But we did something in May that gave you your marching orders as well. And so what's the difference between that and this? And did we incorporate those suggestions into this?
Yeah, so in May, we approved the budget priorities. I think that's what you're referring to. And so those are specific parameters of how I'm to develop the budget. So that's one piece, one document that I do. These are things outside of the budget, really, other than the first one being there's a specific goal and measure of how well I succeed on that goal based upon what the tax levy rate is. And that's related to a conversation that we had about, the goal is to, come in under the projection of where we were. So I fully embrace that goal, and it's one that I look forward to.
All right, any other questions, comments? We had a motion?
I'll move to approve the work plan.
Motion by Supervisor Long.
I'll second it.
Second by Supervisor Cowner. Any other discussion? All's in favor, say aye. Aye. Aye, opposed, motion carried. All right, and last but not least, our final item, consideration of mandated discretionary services, facilities. Jim, you stuck around.
What a guy. Thanks for sticking around.
You're welcome. I'm just really sad because somehow a lot of my slides got tied up with Adam's presentation. So Adam, if you could just show the really cool ones. We'll just kind of get through this really quick. So my apologies. So mandated services, we support them 100%. And to me, what's a mandate? You must do, right? So my department and I believe in doing rather than having somebody tell us we have to do it. We do it. And we take care of the jail. You've toured the jail. We take care of the buildings. We do as much as we can in-house so that we get the quality we're looking for, and we also have the employee buy-in for the things we do. I kind of filled this out to the best of my ability with answering mandated. We're not mandated, but we support the mandated services 100%. So during COVID, it was me and my team, we were working to keep everybody safe. I learned so much about COVID that I don't want to learn anymore. And we're still learning and still going through it, so here we are. We do the things so that everybody else can do their things. In Bob's case, we take care of the nursing home. We've been taking care of Kitty Rhodes. We've got stuff going on with all these buildings, so to have mandated services, somewhere down deep, you have to have a facilities department, and that's what we do.
Any questions for Jim? Supervisor Long.
I know it's late, but I had to give you at least one question.
Come on, man.
So I thought it was just interesting. I noticed under the custodial services, we contract that out, and that just kind of, I was wondering if there are other services that you find that may be worth considering contracting out, or as we contract out services, maybe we're better off bringing those in. I'm just kind of curious what your philosophy is there.
No. So the custodian side of things, we couldn't get applicants for custodial work. So we went out and contracted, kind of like what Sandy has to do in her staff. not being able to find custodians led to a problem. We have to keep the buildings clean, right? So we contracted that out. We are in the process, we just went out for RFP for HVAC service providers. So we contract with 3 providers. That's contracted out. We don't have to have an HVAC tech, which is something we eliminated from our budget last year or the year before. So that we already looked at. We're also doing the same thing with electrical services. So rather than hire an electrician to take care of all of our needs, we can use the 3 contractors for projects and service work. So we kind of like are a hybrid of that. Before coming here and before my work down in Waukesha, I was working with 2 separate times. One on the south side of the border was with a large bank there, and then again on the north side of the border with a different bank, but I was state of Wisconsin. So we contracted out maintenance. We were a contract provider for all of these banks. And I have to tell you, it was horrific what I saw, what we experienced. To find employees that care, we have those here. The contracted workers, you didn't have, it sounds really great in all the books and what they tell you online, but it doesn't work in real life. You lose a lot of the controls, you lose a lot of the accounting, and you also lose a lot of the abilities to respond in a quick way without creating more and more costs. So we've gotten down to where our mechanics can do the work that we need to. There's technical skills on all sides. And by contracting out to these other vendors to apply for the high-profile, more technological positions, this works really well for everybody, I think. It's a good balance.
Any other questions? No? All right. Thank you, Jim. Okay, we made it through our agenda. Yeah, any future agenda items from anybody? No? Any announcements? I was going to say, make sure you go out and vote, but we blew past that
I just want to say,
timeline.
I'm glad that you now hold the record for the longest admin meeting.
Yeah, great. All right, well, our next meeting, September 13th, so, yes, you have something.
Yeah, I spoke with Bill Rubin today, and this affects the chair and I. Admin is 1 hour after our EDC meeting, and they could not move it. They tried to move heaven and earth for us. So I don't know, like if 5:30 is okay, or 5:20. About the third Tuesday. Well, who knows if
the third Tuesday is what we originally moved it from for library board, right?
I mean, I could probably move some, we could take that offline, I think, right now.
Yeah, let's
but,
take it offline.
Just wanted to make that, remind you, and
Yes,
because I
thank you.
had that conversation prior to
Yep.
coming here tonight, so.
Yeah, they tried to find another time, but it didn't work, so. All right, we will adjourn at 8:20. Thank you, everybody. Thanks for.